Congratulations to Michael Strahan, the newest member of the College Football Hall of Fame. Could the Giants have a new member in the Pro Football Hall of Fame next month? We'll talk about it next on the Big Blue Breakdown Live. Hi again, everybody. I'm Paul Dottino, and welcome to the Big Blue Breakdown Live. So glad you could join us back at our regular time, Wednesday evening here at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is what we're going to try to be now for the next several weeks. Well, you heard me say moments ago, the news came out earlier this afternoon. Michael Strahan, Giants Pro Football Hall of Famer, Ring of Honor member, and Super Bowl 42 champion. Yep, now a member of the College Football Hall of Fame. Michael Strahan was a Division I AA, now known as FCS, Defensive Player of the Year in 1992 when he had 19 sacks for Texas Southern University. The Giants grabbed him in the second round. He had over 40 sacks in his college career and, of course, went on to a stellar career to become a legendary New York Giant. So congratulations to Michael. Other Giants news before we get to our Pro Football Hall of Fame discussion. Well, what have we seen? The reports today, Mike Garafolo from NFL Network says that Michael Trier, the Giants safety coach, and Jerome Henderson, the Giants cornerbacks coach, will not be coming back this fall on the staff of Brian Daboll. Now, Frank Perrano, also part of the strength and conditioning program, and Steve Smith, the nutritionist, among the other names, Ben Burris, also a defensive assistant, have all supposedly, according to various reports, been told that they are not going to return for the 2025 season. Now, Brian Daboll had told us last week in his press conference, his last one of the season, that he was going to take several days and figure things out and did not make any promises that his staff would remain intact or that his staff would be shuffled. So these are only reports that we have. They are all unconfirmed by the Giants organization. And, of course, because those reports are unconfirmed, we don't have at this point any idea of who some of the new names may be when the Giants finally open up the 2025 season in September. Well, having said that, it is time really to get to our first themed show of the offseason. Now, we're going to try something a little different because there are no games to talk about on the Big Blue Breakdown every single week. The season is over. We know that. But there's always NFL news year-round. So from this point forward, at least for the next couple of months, as we continue to try to find out if you guys want this program to survive and to continue, and we're all going to figure that out based on the numbers and the hits and the comments that you guys give us, we're going to do our best to try to give you newsworthy theme shows. Now, what are we doing tonight? Well, I've already posted it on X earlier today, and undoubtedly you guys know what's coming up. On February 6th, the Pro Football Hall of Fame will announce its latest class. That'll be 3 days before the Super Bowl down in New Orleans. Now, Giants legend and two-time Super Bowl MVP quarterback Eli Manning is on the ballot. It is his first time on the ballot. He is one of the finalists to make it to the last round. And for some reason, and I have no idea why, there seems to be a debate amongst the NFL community as to whether or not Eli Manning is going to make it to the Hall of Fame, and furthermore, if he should be a first ballot. Now, much to our appreciation, and we are lucky to have him tonight, Hall of Fame voter and former New York Daily News writer Gary Yers is going to join us in just a bit to explain exactly what's going on with all of the positive and negative vibes regarding Eli Manning's candidacy. But first, I want to get you guys caught up on the rules. The Hall of Fame Selection Committee consists of 50 voters. It starts with a media member who covered each of the 32 teams, plus a representative from the Pro Football Writers of America, and then 17 at-large delegates, primarily from an NFL national media pool. You get a lot of TV and radio broadcasters in that at-large group. A modern era candidate, because there are different categories. There's a coaches category, contributors category, seniors category. But we're just talking about the modern era category, which is where Eli Manning is seated. You must be out of the league for at least 5 seasons to be eligible. Then, of course, you've got to get through a process and go through several rounds until they finally get down to the finalists. Now, the voters have already whittled the ballot down to 15 finalists, and it takes an 80% approval, which means 40 out of 50, for a guy to be elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The rules state that between 4 and 8 new inductees will be picked each year. Now, former New York Daily News writer Gary Yers, he's been on the Pro Football Hall of Fame Selection Committee since 2010, and he's been part of the NFL scene since 1978. That is quite a long time. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and among his titles is a great book called Once a Giant, and it's a detailed study of the 1986 Super Bowl 21 championship Giants. The things that made them a champion, and also the things that have happened to those guys over time since. It is a great book. Now, that is about the 86 team. This conversation that I had a very short time ago with Gary Yers was more about the naysayers and the people who say that Eli Manning should not become a first ballot inductee into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Well, I think there's a big difference, but I also think that's pretty foolish, because once a guy gets in the Hall of Fame, nobody asks him how many ballots, how many years did it take you to get in. You're either a Hall of Famer or you're not a Hall of Famer. And the way I view it every year when we vote is, who are the 5 most qualified, worthy candidates? And I don't care whether it's his first year or his 10th year or his 20th and final year of modern era eligibility. I'll vote for the 5 who I think are most deserving. And that's how I look at it, as far as Eli is concerned, that people will say, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer, but, he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, Paul, seriously, I think that's a bunch of garbage. Either you're a Hall of Famer or you're not. You judge them against the competition from that year, and you make your decision.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you, and I don't get a vote, Gary, but I know in baseball there is this long-standing tradition and a very big hullabaloo made out of if you're a first ballot or not. I never thought there was that much of a big deal in football, but there are some people apparently who still think it is. I'm glad to hear that you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the terms that's come up in the last few years is recency bias. And is the committee more apt to put in players whose careers finished up, in this part of NFL history, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and because we remember their careers better because it's more recent. In the case of Eli, I don't think recency bias really comes into play here. And I know we'll get to talk about this, but the factors that come into play, yeah, they're recent because they happened in the last, 15, 17 years. He won 2 Super Bowls and he has 2 Super Bowl MVPs. That's the criteria, or that's the credentials that I'll consider the most.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the potential positives for Eli that the committee's likely to hear about during the course of the meeting, and some of the potential anti-votes for Eli that may be discussed. You talk about the Super Bowls. Okay, so I'm looking at some of the things here that I compiled, and if I were making the case, I would say one of only 6 players to be a multiple Super Bowl MVP, highlighted with the win over the undefeated Patriots, and one of 13 starting quarterbacks to win more than 1 Super Bowl. 7 of the 8 eligible are in the Hall of Fame. Jim Plunkett is the only one not, but that's because his non-Super Bowl career was not very impressive. How heavily do you think that's going to weigh during the conversation?
Well, just as far as Jim Plunkett was a journeyman quarterback who happened to, strike gold a couple of times with the Raiders. He's got one Super Bowl MVP, but I don't think anybody looked at Plunkett as the foundation or the most important player on that team. As far as multiple Super Bowl MVPs, it's a select group. As far as quarterbacks who have won multiple Super Bowls, that's a select group. And Eli just didn't play well in those two Super Bowls. He played well in two playoff runs. I think I have this right, Paul. You're better with numbers than me, I'm sure. But I believe in the two Super Bowl runs, 15 touchdowns and 2 interceptions.
Yeah.
In the 8 games, something like that.
As a road underdog.
Right. And the run in 2007, was a fairly average Giants team. At the time, I think it set the record or tied the record for the poorest record for a Super Bowl champion. And then 4 years later, they broke the record when they were 9-7. They were 10-6 the first time around. So they weren't great teams, but Eli played great and lifted those teams in the Super Bowl runs. And if you remember the first one, after they beat the Bucs on the road and Jeff Garcia, which was, a toss-up game, but the Bucs were higher seeded. Then they go and beat the Cowboys, the 1 seed in Dallas, and they go and beat the Packers, the 2 seed in Lambeau Field, and then they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl when the Patriots were that one victory away from being remembered as the greatest team, the greatest single-season team in NFL history, with the greatest quarterback and the greatest coach in NFL history. And Eli won the game in the last 2 minutes. Then he did it again 4 years later. And my argument is you have those 2 Super Bowl MVPs. He beat Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau Field in the playoffs. If that's not the definition of a Hall of Fame quarterback, tell me what is.
Yeah, for sure. There are those who will just look at stats. Mm-hmm. And you and I both know that, Gary. Maybe they don't think about all of the intangibles and they didn't see the guy every week, and all they have is a stat line to look at. But when you do that with Eli, top 12 all-time NFL in attempts, completions, yards, touchdown passes, game-winning drives in either the fourth quarter or overtime, it seems to me that even guys who are looking purely at numbers are going to have a hard time going against something like that.
Yeah, well, they'll look at the 500 record and all the interceptions he threw and how many times he led the league in interceptions. I want to give you a comparative, okay? Eli Manning record, 117 and 117. Warren Moon, 102 and 101. Now, keep in mind, Warren Moon was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Eli Manning, touchdowns to interceptions, 366 to 244. Warren Moon, 291 to 233. Eli yards, 57,000 and change. Warren Moon, 49,000 and change. Now, Moon has it over Eli, 9-4 in Pro Bowls, 1 All-Pro to none. Super Bowl MVPs, 2-0 Eli. Warren Moon played on some very good teams in Houston and never made it to a conference championship game.
Right.
Okay. Overall record in the playoffs, Eli 8-4, Warren Moon 3-7. Dan Fouts, people think he's one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. First ballot Hall of Famer. 0-2 in AFC championship games. Touchdowns to interceptions, I won't bore you with any more numbers, 254 to 242. So the touchdowns, interceptions for Eli, Moon, and Fouts are relatively the same in terms of percentage. All right. Eli's is actually better than Fouts's. But then when you take the postseason and the regular season records, are fairly similar also. Actually, Fouts 86, 84, and 1. So he was 2 games over 500. Okay. those two guys were first ballot Hall of Famers. So your argument is going to be, well, Eli played in an era. I don't mean to bog down your viewers with all these numbers, but I think they're really important. People are going to say, well, Eli played in an era where, it was easy to throw the ball because the rules had changed. You can keep moving the goalposts any way you want if you're trying to create an argument, because you can make numbers do anything you want for them.
Right.
I mean, that's clear. You can play with numbers and get them to back up your narrative, depending on what your narrative is. The one you can't change is 2 Super Bowl MVPs and the success that he did have over the course of his career. And I truly believe over the last 8 or so years of his career, the Giants management let him down by not building an offensive line, giving him only one weapon, which was Beckham, who was kind of shooting star and didn't last very long. He was kind of a knucklehead. And Eli never really had some of these weapons that the other quarterbacks had. So if you're not going to vote for Eli, it's because you're really looking for reasons, whether it's a New York bias or a Manning bias or whatever it is. I just don't think it's fair.
So it's clear that Gary Myers is absolutely going for Eli in the Hall of Fame and will advocate very heavily for him, no matter who stands up in that meeting and says no. So just quickly, we thank you, Christine and Big Blue and Aiden Fink and Steve Jones and Gary Gaston and Shanita Jackson, all these folks who are chiming in here on the chat today. So glad to have you on. Again, this is a theme show. We're starting off with a lengthy dose of the Hall of Fame, not only Hall of Fame conversation about Eli Manning, but also, as we discussed during our later portion of our talk with Gary Myers, one of the members of the selection committee, we talk about other Giants who he thinks should be in and he has advocated for and have gotten through a few rounds and may still have a chance to get in the ensuing years. But right now, we just don't know. Well, let's go back to Gary Myers and we go deeper into Eli Manning's resume. There's another number, Gary, that I don't think anybody can hold in a subjective way against him, and that's his consecutive starts.
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter what era you played in, if you were able to be reliable and durable and be there for your team every single week, and the number that people talk about, the 16 seasons he played, it should always include the postseason, because those were games too. And they're the most important games to show up for. 222 consecutive starts with the 6 postseason trips that he had during his career. Ranks 4th all time. Never missed a game due to injury. And of the 3 guys ahead of him, Favre, Peyton Manning, his brother, and Phillip Rivers, only Rivers played his entire career, like Eli, without missing a game due to injury. Favre and Peyton missed games later on after they had more games on the consecutive start list. How much weight do people give to that, or should they give more weight to it? Because durability is something that coaches love.
Well, Paul, how many times have you heard coaches and players say, the best ability is availability? And the comfort level that Eli gave to Tom Coughlin all those years of knowing he was going to have the same quarterback every game. I mean, even in 07, if you remember, Eli got hurt.
Sure.
In the opening game of the season against Dallas. I think it was a shoulder injury. And they were projecting he was going to be out weeks. And he started the next week against the Packers. There's an awful lot to be said. I mean, look what's happened to the Giants, even the Daniel Jones era. How many times Jones got hurt, and the Giants wouldn't know from one week to the next who the quarterback was going to be. And I think that counts for an awful lot. It really hasn't come up in the argument with other players, because when you think about, we haven't talked about Rivers yet because he's not eligible. And Peyton and Favre will kind of stand up, say their name, any questions, sit down. I mean, they were no-brainer first ballot Hall of Famers. So this is really going to be the first one that we, get into depth on how important is it that a quarterback was there every Sunday for his team.
All right, so those are some of the most glaring positives, I think, when you talk about Eli. We've gone over some of those. Let me give you, you've already touched on some of the things that negative people are going to say when they talk about his career 500 record, but of course he was 8-4 in the postseason. We've already gone through that, the most important games. They say sometimes, I hear, oh, he only made the postseason in 6 out of his 14 seasons when he was primarily a starter. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't he have made the playoffs more than that? But you and I, Gary, know football's the ultimate team game. You can't pin that on him, can you?
Well, no, but, just on the flip side, to play devil's advocate a little bit, people say, well, if you don't want to hold him accountable for that, then, the Giant defense was really the driving force in at least the first Super Bowl and maybe the second against the Patriots. That Justin Tuck easily could have been the Super Bowl MVP the first time around. So I think coaches and quarterbacks are the only two positions, so to speak, on a team that you can say you can attach a record to, like a starting pitcher in baseball, although that's now kind of gone by the wayside because starting pitchers don't last more than 5 innings. But that's a completely different story for us to discuss at some point. I think that, that is definitely going to be argued that he only made the playoffs 6 times. But the fact that, he won the championship twice, to a certain degree, overrides that. What coach and general manager and team owner, when you're drafting a quarterback and you say you're going to have him for 16 years and he's going to win you 2 Super Bowls, there isn't any of those guys that wouldn't sign up for that right now before they get drafted. You're going to win me 2 championships? Okay, fine. I'm going to ask this question in the meeting, Paul, and I think it's going to get the reaction initially, and then hopefully it'll get people to think. Would Dan Marino switch careers with Eli Manning? Because in the third sentence, in summarizing Marino's career after saying, he threw for whatever touchdowns and yards, is, but he never won a Super Bowl. That is forever attached to Dan Marino's resume. Would he switch all those numbers that he have, which are better than Eli's,
right,
for 2 Super Bowl MVPs? And I've never had a chance to ask Dan about it, but I think it's a legitimate question.
Yeah, for sure. One of the ones that really kind of galls me is when people say some of Eli's contemporaries made him, I don't know, the 5th, 6th, 7th best quarterback in the league at the time. They'll cite he never made All-Pro, right? They'll cite he only made 4 Pro Bowls. And I wonder, why are we basing a guy's Hall of Fame career on just a couple of individual seasons where that comparison is like apples and oranges?
Yeah, I can tell you as a long-time All-Pro voter for the Associated Press that when you see some of the people, when they put out the entire ballot after the fact, who got how many votes for each position, and when you see some of the players, without naming anybody specifically, who just get votes for the All-Pro team, although they don't get named to the first or second team, you wonder if those people were watching the same game that you were. And same thing, Paul, with the Pro Bowl voting. I mean, the Pro Bowl voting is kind of a joke.
Right.
And besides the fact that half the players don't even show up and there's not even a game anymore, players who get picked as alternates for that and then wind up making the team because players drop out of it because people just want to be named to the Pro Bowl. They have no desire to go to the Pro Bowl. But those who replace them they get on their resume, they made the Pro Bowl. So, listen, I think an awful lot of Bill Parcells and, covering him for all those years with the Giants and Jets and elsewhere, some of his sayings really ring true for me, and that's, I go by what I see. And I know an All-Pro player when I watch him. I know a Pro Bowl player when I watch him. And I really think I know a Hall of Fame player when I watch him. There are certain guys that just kind of jump off the page at you, and you think belong in Canton. They use the big, one of the cliches now is, he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. He belongs in the Hall of Very Good. I hate that. I hate the connotation like we talked about before. Is he a first ballot Hall of Famer? If he's a Hall of Famer, he's a Hall of Famer. And the other one is, can you write the history of the game without, name that player? Well, if people want to use that as the standard, how do you possibly write the history of the NFL without writing about Eli and him leading that last drive in Super Bowl 42 that prevents the Patriots from going undefeated, being the first 19-0 team, and then, again, beating the Brady and Belichick and the Patriots again 4 years later. So I think he checks off an awful lot of boxes.
So it's clear that the evidence is overwhelming in favor of Eli Manning being voted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But again, we've got to wait until February 6th to find out when the Pro Football Selection Committee reveals this year's class. Now, let's go back to some of our comments here. Scott Young says, hey, absolutely with you. When an NFL player plays in the league, the ultimate goal is to get a championship. Eli's got 2 of them. He says Eli was money in the playoffs. Absolutely no doubt about it. Rob says Eli made tons of big-time throws. He threw people open. Wasn't a fan of Kevin Gilbride, so says Rob. But you're a better play caller. His stats better play caller than his stats look better for the Hall of Fame. So obviously, again, I would tell you that Eli loved Kevin Gilbride as his offensive coordinator. And Eli's stats, let me just give you something real quick here. We'll get back to Gary Myers in a second because there's a lot more twists and turns to this Hall of Fame story. Eli, as we said before, top 12 all time in attempts, completions, yards, touchdown passes, and game-winning drives in the fourth quarter or overtime. He was clutch. He was big time in the most important situations. All the things that you would want an elite quarterback to do, a Hall of Fame quarterback to do, Eli fulfilled every one of those boxes. I love C. Sanders coming in here. Says, what about the road record? He won every postseason game on the road and as an underdog twice. My man, in 2007, the Giants were underdogs through that entire postseason run. It's such a landslide. I almost hated that I had to do this show. But there are still, for some reason, so many people out there who question this man's Hall of Fame credentials. So I figured it was worth it. We had to hit them with a couple of left hooks to the jaw. And that's what we're doing with this show tonight. Christine, Scott, Aiden, we're going back now to, again, Gary Myers, one of the voters on the Pro Football Hall of Fame Selection Committee. And we're going to talk about, through this recent chat, how Eli Manning's candidacy could be victimized by something that he has absolutely nothing to do with. There's one other name as we get to the last couple of points here that people may use against him. One of them, I think, is very relevant, particularly to you, Gary, because, you have to be the representative that argues for the Jets guys, and you were so instrumental in getting Joe Klecko in, which I think was very well deserved, and Curtis Martin as well. There seems to be, from what I understand over the years from talking to some of the voters, there's a little bit of anti-New York bias. You kind of alluded to it earlier. How much of that might potentially be part of the hurdle for Eli to have to climb over that, because guys like yourself and Bob Glauber have to fight hard for the New York guys to overcome?
Yeah, Glauber makes the opening presentation because he does the Giants guys, and then anybody can speak up afterwards. So I'm certainly speaking up for Eli. I do think there's an anti-New York bias. Now, people in Dallas think there's an anti-Cowboys bias. And, people in Jacksonville think, the Jaguars' small market team, that's why Fred Taylor hasn't gotten in. And that's why it took Tony Baselli such a long time to get in. So, just depending on what your perspective is, you always, you watch a game, you think Joe Buck is rooting against your team when he calls the game, which is kind of ridiculous. In this case, I think there is somewhat of an anti-Manning bias in that he was not as good a player as Peyton. Eli was not as good as Peyton. He was a better postseason player than Peyton. I don't think you can even argue that. And but there are going to be some voters who feel that Eli is just kind of riding Peyton's coattails right into the Hall of Fame, and the Mannings are treated with kid gloves, and everything always goes to the Mannings, and why are we always bowing down to the Mannings? I don't think that's fair. People say, well, if his name was Eli Dottino, he wouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, which is garbage. I'd vote for any Dottino in the Hall of Fame.
Maybe the Big Mouth Hall of Fame, Gary.
The what Hall of Fame?
The Big Mouth Hall of Fame.
So I'm really geared up for a very contentious argument, and I will say this. I do think eventually Eli will get in, and I don't mean to say he's not going to get in the first time. I think it's going to be very hard to keep him out. And the reason I really would like for him to get in the first time is that when you look at, Roethlisberger's coming up, and Drew Brees is coming up, and a couple of years later, Brady is coming up, and Rivers, although
right.
I think Manning versus Rivers is a simple argument for me, that Eli had a better career. Big Ben is, a good argument. Roethlisberger, first Super Bowl victory, the Steelers won in spite of Roethlisberger. He might have played one of the worst games ever, him and Trent Dilfer, for a team that won a Super Bowl. So I think this is going to be one of our more interesting discussions that I've ever taken part in, because Eli, for whatever reason, Paul, a mild-mannered guy who was always nice to everybody, he's become a really polarizing figure in the Hall of Fame argument. And the few times I've written about it on Twitter, it's amazing how much emotion it evokes from the pro-Eli faction and the anti-Eli faction. Nobody is split down the middle on this. Everybody has a strong opinion. It's just those opinions seem to be split.
Right. Well, I'll tell you something, Gary. If I don't ask you about just a couple of other things here, because you wrote the book Once a Giant about the 1986 Super Bowl championship team, so your connection to those guys is obviously very well documented. And Carl Banks is from that team. We know, that one of Parcells' disciples, Tom Coughlin, also gets a lot of support. But these guys are not in yet. And Giants fans keep asking me too. And while I have you as a member of the Hall of Fame committee, it's probably incumbent upon me to ask you how much momentum, how much consternation, how much more push does a guy like Coughlin, a guy like Carl Banks, a guy like even Tiki Barber, those guys, they're not Eli Manning, okay? They're not. But these are guys that Giant fans would love to see get honored. What do you think the chances are that maybe, just maybe, they'll get enough push at some point in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And each of those guys, Barber, Coughlin, and Banks, are in different categories. Because, Tiki, let's talk about him first. He's still in the modern era category, which means you're eligible 5 years after your career is over, and then for the next 20 years. If you don't get in after 20 years, you go into the senior pool. I've made a big push for Tiki the last few years. Last year he made it to the final 25, did not make it to the final 15, but was close to the final 15. This year he didn't make it to the final 25, so he went backwards, which to me is disturbing, and I don't really understand it. But I'm going to keep trying. Carl, I've been pushing for a number of years. He and Everson Walls are like my two guys in the senior category, and I'm on that committee. That subcommittee that I've really been advocating for, and they both made it to the final 25, but not the final 12 we went down to this year, and I don't quite understand that. Walsh has made it that far a few years ago, but not the last couple of years. To me, they're both very deserving. I have the most confidence that Coughlin is going to get in out of those three. There's three coaches, Mike Holmgren, Mike Shanahan, and Tom Coughlin, that there was a logjam. Holmgren was the one that came forward this year that we're voting on. And I'm anticipating that he'll make it. then I think Shanahan has a good chance of being next, but it could be Coughlin. I'm not on that subcommittee, so I don't have a vote. But as long as they keep the coach committee separate from the contributor committee, there'll be one coach who gets nominated each year. And whether it's Shanahan next year or Coughlin next year, one of those two will be sent to the entire committee to be voted on. So I think Tom has a really good chance of getting in either 2026 or 2027, because clearly those are the two coaches that are next up. One I can't answer for when he's eligible, because I've heard a couple of different things, is Belichick.
He may come back, Gary. We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, when he got fired by the Patriots, I was hearing stuff that he only had to be out 1 year or he was eligible immediately. I honestly don't know what the rules are, because it used to be a coach, or it has been a coach had to be out 5 years, just like the players. That was the old Bill Parcells rule, that he was up for it after he left the Jets, and people didn't vote for him because they were concerned that he was going to go back and coach, which he wasn't doing. At that point, you only had to be out a year. And then it went to 5 years. I don't know if they changed the rule again. So we might have to put Belichick in that, which would push Shanahan and Holmgren back. But I'm not positive what the rule is on that. But I think Tom will get in. It's just going to take a couple more years.
All right, so Sean Jackson says, I agree. Tiki, Coughlin, Carl Banks. Iman Perry says, Tiki's got Hall of Fame numbers, no question. Sean Jackson says, it's a shame Eli's starting streak was stopped by Ben McAdoo. I get that. Eli was extremely classy despite being benched for Geno Smith and Daniel Jones, which was insane. Eli's still a class act. Sean, I'm going to tell you something. Not only did I think it was wrong for Eli Manning to be benched for Geno Smith, I thought Eli Manning had at least another year in him. You know, he was 39 years old when he retired after the Giants had already made the switch to Daniel Jones, and I think that's a shame. I think it was a premature switch. I know the Giants were not doing well, but changing quarterbacks was not going to change anything. I personally believe that Eli had at least another year in him, and maybe two more actually productive seasons in the league. We see how guys can be starting quarterbacks at an advanced age. Aiden loved that Gary Myers said Eli Dottino. Yeah, well, let's put it this way. If somehow Eli and I were related, I'd probably have a much better arm, okay? And I'd have a chance at making millions and millions of dollars playing pro football, because we know how that family is just done so well for itself. Aiden Fink says, beating Brady twice, road underdog during both Super Bowl runs for almost every game. No question. We know about the home game in Atlanta in 2011. Imagine saying he shouldn't be in Canton. Well, anybody who says that's a fool. You understand that, Aiden, obviously. There's no question about it. E-Man Perry says some people just don't like Eli. There's no question. You have to be holding something against him not to vote for him when the facts speak for themselves. All right, you've heard some of what Gary has said about Tom Coughlin. Well, it also turns out that there is another coach who was with the Giants for a little while who got real close to making the Hall of Fame, but isn't quite in there yet. You know, there's one other name I probably left off there, and I shouldn't have, because you know him real well, and the late Dan Reeves. Who certainly had a tremendous career in so many facets, you know, not just as head coach of the Broncos, but he basically was the GM. And then we know about Atlanta, goes through Super Bowl with him. Denver went to Super Bowls with him. His career as an assistant coach and as a player. My goodness, I could almost make an argument for him as a contributor, if not just as a coach.
A contributor in what way?
Well, in terms of the service that he gave to the league and in all the different aspects that he was able to provide, you know, just high quality NFL product. Pretty incredible guy over the course of his career.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that, you know, he's pretty much in the coach category. if he had been a general manager at one point or vice president of football operations, and he might have had those titles along the way.
I mean, he did kind of put those Broncos teams together, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. You're right. But I think he's pretty much considered a coach in terms of Hall of Fame qualifications. I will tell you that a few years ago, in addition to being on the senior committee, I was on the coach committee, and that was the only year I was on that. And they separated the seniors and the coaches. I mean, they were always separate categories, but in terms of the voters, they just had a completely different group voting on the coaches and the seniors. And they asked me which one I wanted to be on. I said I'd rather stay on the senior committee. So that's what I've been on. But the one year that I was also on the coach committee, there was a log jam. Two people voted for, I can tell you, it's after the fact. Two people voted for Vermeil. Two people voted for Buddy Parker. And one guy, who was me, voted for Dan Reeves. And that was our final three, and it was a stalemate. So they said to me that Reeves is eliminated because the other two got 2 votes and he only got 1.
Right.
And so now we did a revote. Now I knew the 2 that voted for Vermeil were going to stick with Vermeil. The 2 that voted for Buddy Parker were going to stick with Buddy Parker. And I was going to cast a deciding vote. So, I mean, it was, I didn't take that responsibility lightly. And I was disappointed that Dan was not going to get in, but at that point I couldn't vote for him anymore.
Right.
And so I voted for Vermeil, and that's why Vermeil. I've never told this to Dick, who I like very much, that he might have got in the next year or the year after, who knows. But the reason he got in that year, and I don't remember what that was, it was 2017, 18, something like that, maybe a little bit later. I was the reason he got in that year, only because the way the voting broke down, I had to change my vote. And with the logjam at 2-2, mine, whoever voted for, the guy was going to get 3 and get in. So, but Dan came close that year because we had a long list, and he made it to the final 3. I'm very disappointed that the coach committee in the years since has not come back and put Dan in, especially, before he passed away, most of the voters knew he was ill, and not that should be a reason that you put somebody in. It really shouldn't. But because he was ultra qualified and had come so close, what a great moment that would have been before he passed away if they were able to tell him that he was in the Hall of Fame. And, with his mentor, Tom Landry. I mean, that would have been just a tremendous honor for him, and I'm still disappointed he's not. I do think, again, as long as we keep putting a coach up for nomination, I do think that Dan will get in at some point. But it's such a hard wait, Paul, for the family, because each year, whatever category you're in, and you get your hopes up, you think this is your year, and then you don't make it. And then it's like, who wants to hear better luck next year, or next year's your year? Who knows what's going to happen in the next year? And what, as far as some of these guys who are long in age, what their health situation is going to be, or what new candidates are going to be on the ballot that jump the line ahead of you. So nobody wants to hear, well, you came really close and, keep your spirits up. Next year can be your year, because who knows if next year will be their year.
Right. So we talked about Dan Reeves, who unfortunately is still not in. One of the things about Dan is that you'll remember he brought the Broncos to a number of Super Bowls, didn't get a win, but was there a number of times. Brought the Giants to the playoffs. Brought the Atlanta Falcons to a Super Bowl. Don't understand that one. Don't understand that one either. But there have been so many people made to wait by the Hall of Fame selection committee over the years. It just boggles the mind how some guys who have an outstanding resume and should be a slam dunk somehow keep getting tossed to the side. All right, a couple of comments here from some of our folks on the chat. And remember, right after we're done with Gary Yers, we'll be looking for not only chat comments and questions, but you'll be able to video call in with me or audio call in with me as well as we discuss anything about the Hall of Fame or about the Giants. Scott Young says, I'm sure Ernie Accorsi is very proud of Eli Manning. What a wonderful draft pick. Well, he wasn't a draft pick. It was the trade of the draft pick that they used on Phillip Rivers, plus 3 others that the Giants were able to go up and get Eli Manning for in that deal with the Chargers. Scott Young says, Dan Reeves deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Phil Simms speaks highly of him, said he enjoyed playing for him. There's no question about that. Christine says that she agrees. And you know what's interesting, Scott? Not only has Phil Simms talked about how much he enjoyed playing for Dan Reeves, you'll have to remember, when Dan Reeves came into the Giants fold in 1993, there seemed to be some question as to, oh my goodness, Giants have a new head coach. Jim Fossil had, not Jim Fossil, Ray Handley. I'm sorry, as I got confused for a moment. Jim Fossil was after Dan Reeves. Ray Handley was right before Dan Reeves. There was some question. What's going to happen between Jeff Hostetler and Phil Simms? Is Phil Simms going to be around? Well, from the moment that Dan Reeves stepped onto the Giants campus, he made it clear he wanted Phil Simms to be his starting quarterback. And Phil was ecstatic, obviously, to be selected by Dan to continue his career in Big Blue. And, what happened that year? Phil Simms and Lawrence Taylor, in their final regular seasons as NFL players, led the Giants to the playoffs, a victory over the Minnesota Vikings, and then ultimately defeated out in San Francisco by the 49ers in what was a lopsided game. The Giants were badly beaten up and tired and wounded. The Niners had a bye week. They were home. Ricky Waters had 5 touchdowns in the game. And immediately following the game, Lawrence Taylor, at his news conference, a press conference at the podium in Candlestick Park's locker room, did formally announce his retirement, the end of an era for the Giants. It would be a couple of months later, Phil Simms would have rotator cuff surgery and then would not make it back to an NFL field. As in the middle of May, General Manager George Young decided that with the salary cap now in play, the Giants could not take a chance and hold on to Phil Simms and have that money eaten up on the cap, not knowing how the rotator cuff would heal. And so he decided to release Phil Simms and move forward with Dave Brown. Wellington Mara, the Giants' owner of the franchise, was very unhappy by that decision, but said that George Young had to make all the calls for the football team as the general manager. And I remember Wellington Mara coming down to meet the press after that move was made, and he said, I don't want this to happen. I don't like this move. But I've given George the authority to make football decisions. And so I will not interfere. As it turned out, Phil Simms never did come back despite opportunities potentially with the Arizona Cardinals and the Cleveland Browns, who both showed interest, but never actually came back and signed an NFL contract to go to another NFL camp. And so both Simms and Taylor played their last seasons with Big Blue in 1993 and went out on a playoff team. So yes, Scott, I think everybody within the Giants organization appreciates the turnaround that Dan Reeves brought them when, after 2 really rough times of missing the playoffs, remember, it was after Bill Parcells, 2 years of Ray Handley, where the Giants were just mediocre. And then Dan Reeves brought some shine, if you will, back to the golden veneer of the Giants franchise, and that was really cool. So, in any event, That's the deal. And so Dan Reeves still waiting for a possible Hall of Fame selection. All right. We go back now, finally, to end our conversation with Hall of Fame voter Gary Yers. And he explains the intangibles that come into play when you try to figure out who is going to receive pro football's greatest honor. I think that's the one thing that, as fans, it's very easy to debate a name, right? Because those names are not like family members. They're not like teammates. They're not like guys that you worked with every single day. Fans can debate it all, but we're not attached to those people who literally go through gut-wrenching days and weeks thinking about this. And that's why guys like you who take it seriously, who have been doing this for such a long time, are so important to being on that committee. And obviously you've had some golden touches over the years, like I said, Klecko and Martin, and obviously Dick Vermeil, and I don't know how many other guys you may have tipped the scales for, but it's great to hear that you're so much in favor of Eli Manning.
Yeah, now, just as far as Curtis Martin, and Curtis, when I would see Curtis, he introduced me to his friends as, this is the guy who got me in the Hall of Fame. I said, will you stop it? At the time you retired, you were the fourth leading rusher in NFL history. If you didn't get in the Hall of Fame, you can blame me for that, but I just zero credit. Seriously. The guy's fourth leading rusher in NFL history when he retired. I mean, what else is he supposed to do? Now, as far as Klecko, and people have credited me, and Joe does. Joe is very gracious in this.
Yes.
And listen, I was very in favor of Joe, and I what's the word I want to use? Advocated for him, very strongly. And that's also one of the downfalls of the seniors, Paul, is there are so many qualified guys. And we start off with a list of 125 to 150. And there's only 9 of us on the committee. So unless you have somebody that is pushing for you, it's so easy to get ignored or fall through the cracks. Because there's nobody necessarily in the senior pool that is a no-brainer. If he was a no-brainer, he would have made it as a modern era candidate because he was already considered for 20 years.
Is Otis Anderson part of that senior pool right now, Gary?
Who's that? I'm sorry?
Otis Anderson?
Yes. Otis made it to the final 25 this year also, I'm pretty sure. And then when we cut it down to 9, either he or Carl got it. And, I push for... I push for people I believe in. I'm not going to advocate for somebody who, I just happen to like.
Right.
I got to stand behind his candidacy and find reasons to convince the other voters. So, Otis and Carl and Everson Walls, like I mentioned before, those are guys that, and Leonard Marshall. I want to put Leonard Marshall in there also.
Wow.
Those, and Leonard's team, I'll call it, really tried to raise awareness with him this year. They put out a very impressive brochure of his qualifications, and I think they at least got people thinking about him, although he didn't make it to the final 25, so there's some work to do with Leonard. But it's just, Paul, it's so hard to come out of the senior class. Guys come out of nowhere. They just get some momentum going, and it's just really hard to separate yourself. So you need somebody on that committee that's pushing for you with the other voters, or even somebody who's part of the 49-member selection board that is pushing for a senior with the senior voters. It's just really hard for a guy to emerge from that without, I want to say, a little bit of a campaign, because there's, in my opinion, there's just a lot of players who are in that group. I mean, Roger Craig, to me, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. People forget, when Montana won his second Super Bowl, it was before Jerry Rice got there. Mm-hmm. Roger Craig that year in 1984 was the first 1,000 running back, yards, catches, and rushing in NFL history. I mean, he was a dynamic player for a long time. Roger Craig's not in the Hall of Fame. He deserves to be in there. And there's a lot of guys that you can put in that group. But I'm really trying hard for Carl and Leonard and Otis and Everson Wall. So I covered his entire career in Dallas. And then I told him he followed me to New York. I moved to New York in '89. He came in 1990. Helped the Giants win that Super Bowl with that open field tackle of Thurman Thomas,
Yep.
which I know you remember really well.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that all those guys will get in at some point.
Before I let you go, Gary, it is interesting that on the regular Hall of Fame committee, I believe, Dan Fouts is on that as an at-large voter. He's the only quarterback, I believe, who then went into the media who is on the Hall of Fame voting committee. So that ought to be very interesting because, as you mentioned, Fouts' stat line, if you want to go by stats, very similar to Eli's. It'll be interesting to see if that works in his favor or against.
Yeah, Dan Fouts and James Lofton are the only two former players who are on the committee. They added maybe 6-7 years ago. Tony Dungy and Bill Polian are on the committee the last 2-3 years. And they're the only coach and GM who are on the main committee. There's a couple former GMs who run the subcommittees. I can already hear what I'm going to say in the Eli thing. I'm going to say, Dan, with all due respect, when I'm going to compare Eli's numbers to his and Eli's postseason accomplishments to Dan, and I think Dan was great. But,
yeah,
he was pretty much a 500 quarterback, even touchdowns, interceptions, with very little postseason success, although we did get to two conference championship games. It might have been harder to get into the playoffs in those years, but maybe easier to get to the championship game because there's one fewer round.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying Dan Fouts or Warren Moon don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm just saying if they're in there and they were first ballot guys, how do you make an argument against Eli Manning?
Yeah, for sure. Gary Myers, it has been such a pleasure to hammer out this Hall of Fame debate with you. We appreciate, as fans, everything that you have done for the game and all that you continue to do to service on the Hall of Fame committee to figure out the guys who really should be honored as the greats of the game. Gary, we wish you all the best. Be well.
Thanks for having me on, Paul. I always appreciate it.
Great stuff from Pro Football Hall of Fame Selection Committee member Gary Myers. In fact, if you don't get a chance to pick up his book, Once a Giant, once again, it's about the 1986 Super Bowl 21 champions. Great stuff. I covered that team. I knew those guys very well, still know many of them very well. And Gary's book is an outstanding in-depth look at not only that team as it was on its way to a Lombardi trophy, but the subsequent years about how they have all stuck together. Gary also took his time not only to, talk about things with the Hall of Fame committee and kind of debate what's going on with their vote, but he's also working on his latest book. We told you he's a best-selling New York Times author. It's coming out in mid-August, and it's titled Brady versus Belichick, The Dynasty Debate, as he tries to sort through all of the arguments. Once again, everything seems to be an argument, right? He tries to sort through the arguments to figure out who deserves more credit for that Patriots dynasty. Tom Brady, the quarterback, or the head coach, the one and only Bill Belichick. And once again, another guy from the New York Giants lineage who is undoubtedly going to be in Canton in the Pro Football Hall of Fame one day. All right, so that's it as far as our theme discussion with Gary Myers. You've heard all the evidence. You got the facts. You got the intangibles. If anybody out there honestly believes that Eli Manning does not deserve a vote for the Hall of Fame, I suggest you try to come up with some other reason, because there is too much evidence against you to possibly vote no for Eli Manning. All right, as we continue with our chats, and folks, You see at the bottom of the screen, as we always tell you, we're willing to take video calls. We're willing to take audio calls. We can also go through the chats over here. Lewis Hatchett, I guess he's referring to Big Blue Kickoff Live, because I did the show earlier today, says, why do you dislike Russ? That means Russell Wilson. He's way better than Jimmy G. That's Jimmy Garoppolo. You just like him because he's a Goomba. He won't make the team better. He's washed up. Well, Lewis, first of all, Jimmy Garoppolo threw for over 330 yards in his one start this year, last week or 2 weeks ago for the Rams against the Seattle Seahawks. Had a couple of touchdown passes, did throw one pick, but looked very, very good. He's also, I believe, 34 years old this calendar year. Russell Wilson is 36, maybe going on 37. So Wilson is a lot older. He's had a lot more wear and tear on his tires. He's thrown a ton more passes, so you just don't know how long his arm is going to hold up. And by the way, Lewis, here's the other problem. And again, I think Russell Wilson deserves consideration if he becomes a free agent and is let go by the Steelers. You know, the Giants, remember, when Russell Wilson was free this offseason, he did stop in on the Giants to find out about being a potential fit before he quickly went off to the Steelers. The reason he did is because he knew that they were going to put him in competition against Justin Fields. And he knew he would blow Fields out of the water and obviously become the Steelers' starter. He knew that the deal here with the Giants is that once Daniel Jones was healthy, Jones was going to start. That was made very clear. The Giants were looking for a backup/emergency quarterback. And so Russell Wilson wasn't so happy with that situation. He wanted to go to a place where he knew he could potentially overthrow the starter. That's why he wound up in Pittsburgh. Now, over the last 48 hours, you know, obviously since the Steelers lost that playoff game, they lost 5 in a row to end the season, and their offense didn't perform that well. There's been a lot of speculation in the Pittsburgh media. Half of the folks seem to think he may be on his way out as a free agent. The other half of the folks think that because he and Mike Tomlin have a good relationship, that Russell Wilson's going to re-sign with the Steelers. Apparently, the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh, Arthur Smith, who himself is going on some other job interviews to potentially get a head coaching job, apparently Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson butt heads a lot. They have a very cool relationship if you're to believe the Pittsburgh media. So there just seems to be some doubt as to whether or not Wilson is going to stay with the Steelers. So at the moment, he is unsigned and will be a free agent in March. But again, look at that 5-game losing streak to end the season for Pittsburgh. I do think you would consider Russell Wilson if you were the Giants and looking for a bridge. But hands down, Jimmy Garoppolo over Russell Wilson is not even close to being a better fit for the Giants. That's a pretty obvious selection for me, for already the couple of reasons I've said, but also because at the money. I mean, Russell Wilson was able to go to Pittsburgh dirt cheap this year because of offset language that the Denver Broncos had to pick up a ton of his salary. Well, Wilson still thinks of himself as a real starting quarterback, not as a bridge. He is going to be asking probably for at least double the amount of money that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to cost you as a guy who's coming in here as a bridge and potentially trying to resuscitate his career. So financially, I think Russell Wilson sees himself on a much different level than the bridge quarterback type that I would think the Giants are going to look for. So, Lewis, I'm sorry, but it's hands down for so many reasons. So many reasons. It's clear to me that Garoppolo would be a better fit for the Giants, not to mention the fact that he and Dable were together with New England back in 2016. Garoppolo was a rookie on a Patriots team that had Tom Brady as the starter, Jacoby Brissett and Jimmy Garoppolo were the backups. They won the Super Bowl that year. Dable was on that staff. Brissett also, by the way, is a pending unrestricted free agent in March as well, but I would not look at him. And And so, there's no question that Dable at least knows something about Jimmy and about his makeup and about the kind of guy he is. He's known universally as a great teammate. And by the way, the other thing that favors Jimmy G is that since that time, he also went out to San Francisco and learned the West Coast offense, which is all about getting rid of the ball quick. Quick delivery, get it out, and spread it around as best as you can before the pass rush has an opportunity to get to you. Well, the Giants' offensive line is much improved, okay? But it's still not in the upper half of the NFL. And so getting rid of the ball quick and getting yak yardage happens to be one of the things that Brian Dable emphasizes in his playbook. He's got a lot of that stuff in there. Get rid of the ball quick, get yak yardage stuff. Russell Wilson is more of a hold the ball, try to run around a little bit if you can, and try to get the ball downfield. Those plays take a lot longer, and that's not the kind of stuff that Brian Dable's really interested in. So Jimmy G is also a much better fit for the Giants playbook as it stands from what we've seen with Brian Dable over his first 3 years with the Giants. So, Lewis, you couldn't be more off base on that one. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. All right, let's see. Sean Jackson has to be a New York bias because Parcells didn't get in the first time. Yeah, that's something that I did talk about with Gary Yers. There's no question that there are people on that committee that, they think that New Yorkers hype up their guys too much, especially when they do well. Eamon Perry says, once a Giant, always a Giant. Christine says she totally agrees. Okay, Scott Young says, not to bring up a bad subject, but whatever happened to Ray Handley after the Giants? Did he ever have any coaching jobs in the league? No, he did not. My understanding is that Ray Handley took his money and got out of the business, out of the football business. He was an extremely smart man, specifically in the mathematician area. And I had heard some people say that perhaps he had also won some money out in Nevada by using those mathematical skills. But I don't have that confirmed. Anyway, Scott, thanks for the comment. He also says, way before the internet, I'm up there in age now, but I remember reading all of Gary Yers' articles when I was a kid. They were the good old days. Yeah, Gary Yers covered the Cowboys for some years, was with the Associated Press. Again, he started working around NFL games. I believe it was with AP back in 1978. And then he went to Dallas. He covered the Cowboys for a few years. Then he came back to New York for AP to, I believe it might have been the Dallas Morning News, if I'm not mistaken, and then came back to New York with the Daily News, and he covered the Giants. He was on the beat for a couple of years. 1989, I think it was, he came back to the Giants. Was there? He covered the beat for 2 years. Then he became like an at-large NFL columnist. So you're talking about a guy who has been around for decades and decades. Even, when you consider, the Hall of Fame selection committee, he was on that in 2010. So even though that's only about 15 years, it's still quite a lengthy duration. So he's a very highly respected member of that voting panel. And for him to push as hard as he's going to do for Eli Manning should just help Manning's chances. And remember, as you heard during the interview, if you didn't hear it before, I invite you to go back to the archive. He was very influential. He is the Jets representative, okay? He is the Jets representative. Bob Glauber, who used to cover the NFL for the Gannett Westchester newspapers, the Rockland Journal-News, and then Newsday. He is the Giants representative. Gary's been on the committee longer. And again, once the representative goes out and advocates for the player, then anybody in the room can jump on. Gary is always very, very vocal and jumps on very quickly. And as you heard, he's in support of Carl Banks. He's in support of Leonard Marshall. He's in support of Dan Reeves and Everson Walls and Tiki Barber. he's really going at gangbusters. Carl Banks also, don't let me forget that. He's got a lot of ammunition trying to support all of these. Otis Anderson, we mentioned, another guy he supports. So, Gary was a good guy to get on during this conversation because I didn't want to just restrict it to Eli Manning. I know he's a finalist and he's a first ballot contender, but I thought there were some other ancillary stories about the Hall of Fame selection process that Gary could give us, and also talk about some of these other Giants legends who may or may not, over the course of the next few years, get close enough and then finally knock in the door to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. All right, let's see. Yeah, Scott Young says Leonard Marshall, another great Giant. Never forget the hood he put on Joe Montana. No question. I did see one comment here. Mikey C says, trade for Joe Milton. Well, Mikey C, Joe Milton had one game on his NFL resume. Had a couple of serious injuries that ended two of his seasons when he was at Tennessee in college. Cannon of an arm, big tall guy, little bit slender, but a big tall guy. Throws a mean football. I mean, he can really put it out there. And there seems to be questions about, obviously, the amount of experience he had in college. It was limited because of the injuries. Already having a significant injury twice that ended seasons in college does not help your resume when you're getting drafted into the NFL. Unfortunately, he also had some accuracy issues. And there's a lot of questions about, because of the lack of experience, his ability to handle pressure and to read defenses at the NFL level. So he had one nice game at the very end of this past season, but that's all he's got. Remember, he was drafted, I believe, in the 6th round this past NFL draft. So the stock on him is really not very high. Now, I will tell you this. Coming out of the Combine last year, I did think that he and Travis, the Florida State quarterback who had a broken leg last season, wound up getting drafted earlier than Milton and by the New York Jets, I believe. I think it was 2 rounds earlier. It might have been the 4th or 5th round. Travis got picked up by the Jets. I thought if you were going to take a late round flyer on a quarterback in last year's draft, I thought Milton or Travis would have been the two guys that I probably would have picked up the phone for. So I'm not dissing Joe Milton in any way, but here's the problem. The Giants have a Herculean schedule coming up in the fall of 2025. It is absolutely brutal. The bridge quarterback that you bring in, okay, the bridge quarterback has to be a guy, in my opinion, who has won a bunch of games in the NFL in pressure situations, specifically the postseason. And there aren't a lot of guys on that pending free agent shelf who really fit that mold. There's a handful of them, a half a dozen or so. There's Garoppolo, there's Flacco, there's Tannehill, who wants to come back after taking a year off. Teddy Bridgewater's won some games in this league before. He'll probably be set free by Detroit. There could be Russell Wilson. There will be Andy Dalton, who's gone, I think, 5 different seasons of playoffs. So there are guys. Carson Wentz is another guy who's been to the playoffs and has won a bunch of games. I'm not a big fan of most of those guys. I think for whatever reason they don't check enough of my boxes. It's clear the guy who checks most of my boxes, and I've analyzed this Giant situation every which way but loose, it's Jimmy Garoppolo. There's no doubt in my mind about that. He checks the most boxes as the bridge quarterback. Now, Mikey C, get back to me. Either call me up, give me an audio call or give me a video call, but get back to me and tell me, were you looking at Milton as the bridge, or were you looking at Milton as the future guy? Because what the Giants need to do is sign a bridge, in my opinion, for 2025 who can get them competitive and get them a chance to win some games. That's why it's got to be a guy with a really strong resume. And you'd like to get a reclamation project, right? Because that guy's going to be affordable. Because you're not going to spend huge money on a bridge. You want to get a bargain. You want to get a guy who's on his second go-round, who's really looking to prove himself. Somebody like Kerry Collins years ago. Somebody like Kurt Warner years ago. Jimmy Garoppolo fits the mold. Again, won a Super Bowl as a backup with the Patriots, and then went to a Super Bowl and lost as a starter with San Francisco. Now, here's the thing. If that's your bridge, and I think you sign a bridge, and here are the parameters for me. You sign the bridge who's going to give you 2025 as a starter and potentially 2026 as a starter if necessary, because the young guy that you bring in as supposedly the next guy, you may not find him in 2025. See, as I sit here now, and again, if I get to go to the Combine this year, and I think that's probably going to happen again, I'll get a lot more intel on all these players. But as I see it now, this quarterbacks class, which most people have already said, is not very stellar. So what I'm looking at is if you draft a quarterback from this class on the second day, or maybe even in the fourth round at the beginning of the third day, that guy redshirts in 2025. Your veteran bridge plays the whole season and wins as many games as he can. You see how it plays out. You go into 2026, and either your bridge starts the 2026 season, or maybe the guy who you redshirted is prepared to challenge him in 2026. Or maybe he's not good enough, and the bridge starts 2026, and in 2026, you draft a first-round quarterback. See, that's why the bridge is very important. In some ways, it's even more important than a quarterback who you might draft this year. Because the bridge is going to be the guy who's going to win enough games this year to keep the staff and the GM and the coach to keep those guys going. Because if you don't win games this year in 2025, if you play a young guy, whether it's a young veteran who doesn't have pelts on his belt or a rookie, chances are you're not winning very many games this fall. You'll win very few. And I don't think John Mara is going to feel very good about that, because he's already said if he doesn't feel better than he did this past January, next year, that's a problem, because his patience is thin. So you've got to try to be competitive immediately in 2025. You need a team that's going to be at least in the middle of the pack. And you need a guy, a veteran, with an extensive winning resume to be able to achieve that. Again, a guy who can play in 25 and possibly even start for you in 26. And whether or not you get the next quarterback late in the 25 draft as a project, or you get one early in the 2026 draft as a prospect, the bridge has to be good enough to win games in at least 25 and maybe even in 26. Because if you draft a first rounder in 26, you want to redshirt him too. So you want that bridge to be able to play at least 25 and probably, or at least possibly in 26 as your starter. One of the reasons why a 34-year-old Jimmy Garoppolo, who's got a lot of tread left on his tire, is a much better choice than a guy who's 36, 37, 38, 39, a lot younger, still in the latter prime of his career and with a lot less wear on his tires because of the time that he's missed. Very, very significant. All right. I see I got a video call, so we will get to more of your chats in just a bit. But let me get here to Aiden. We're going to throw you on the stage, Aiden.
How's it going, Paul?
Hey, my man. Good to talk to you again. How you been?
Good to talk to you. I've been good.
Excellent.
Yeah,
what do you got for me tonight?
Yeah, so one thing I want to say is I feel like the free agency class for quarterbacks, I feel like you could say it's equally like as weak as the draft class for quarterbacks. Like, and the Giants haven't been this situation where the quarterback's a total mystery. Like, it's been ages.
Well, it was kind of rough after Phil Simms retired. They had to deal with Dave Brown. They had to deal with Kent Graham. They had Tommy Maddox. They had Danny Cannell. Danny Cannell actually got them to the playoffs in 1997. You'll remember they won the division title, and they got to the
before my time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forget sometimes how old I really am. But they won the division title in 97 and went to the playoffs and got beaten by the Minnesota Vikings with a really bad call in the end zone. But we won't get into that right now. But the point is, things were really swirling around this Giants team for a handful of years until Ernie Accorsi said, hey, you know what? I'm going to reach back into my Penn State days, because he and Joe Paterno were extremely close. And he wound up bringing Kerry Collins here off a scrap heap. Kerry Collins had one decent season as a first-round pick in Carolina and then fizzled out and then went to New Orleans, and that didn't work out well at all, and he was set free. Nobody wanted to touch Kerry Collins. Everybody thought his career was already over after only a few years and a quick fizzle. And then Ernie Accorsi brought him here to the Giants, and not only did he make a couple of playoff appearances, but also got the Giants to the Super Bowl. So, that's what they've got to do. They've got to find the right bridge, the right veteran who is going to turn his career back around and have second life. We know what happened with Kurt Warner. We know that. Ernie Accorsi went and got Kurt Warner. Turned his career around. He was on the trash heap too. Nobody wanted Kurt Warner. He was sitting out there, had no interest. And Ernie's like, okay, he knew he was going to draft the next star quarterback in the 2004 draft. He knew he was going to do it. So in March, he's like, I got to get myself a bridge. And there was Kurt Warner sitting there with all his terrific records from the St. Louis Rams. Nobody wanted him. He had a broken thumb, had trouble holding on to the ball. He was fumbling a lot. And people were like, you know what? His time has passed. And Ernie brought him in, and he had the Giants at 5-4 before Tom Coughlin said, I've had enough of this. He's holding the ball too long. Our offensive line isn't very good. He's taken too many sacks. And Coughlin benched Kurt Warner and put Eli in there for the express purpose of getting Eli some experience down the final half of the season so that he'd get a jump on the 2005 campaign. And it worked perfectly, Aiden, because what happened? The Giants went from a non-playoff team in 2004 to making the playoffs in 2005, primarily because Eli started the second half of his rookie season. You see?
Yeah.
So
I think that's
what we're looking at. That's the blueprint. Tom Coughlin already showed everybody what the blueprint is.
Yeah, but I know how you've been talking about you totally don't want the Giants take a quarterback in the first round with the third pick, I'm with that. None of these guys are generational talents. I think, like you've talked on BBK a bit about like picking someone in the second round, more of a developmental guy.
Well, I mean, it just makes the most sense.
Absolutely.
Because look, what were the three priorities that John Mara, the co-owner, listed a couple of weeks ago? He said, got to get a quarterback, and it can be through trade, free agency, or draft. He wasn't locking himself into the draft either.
No.
Okay? Then he said, number two, I'm tired of seeing people go up and down, down the field through our defense. Okay? And who are the best four players in this draft? They're all defensive players. Hunter and Johnson, the two corners. Graham, the defensive tackle. And Carter, the edge rusher. It just so happens that the best four overall players in this draft are dynamite defensive players. If you're the Giants, why wouldn't you do that? You get your bridge quarterback and then get one of the best four defensive players in the draft. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, and you've said this several times that you don't draft for a position, you draft for the players.
Right. And if it happens to match up with something that you really badly need,
And great.
my man, ring the bell. You got a winner. So it just makes so much sense. So much sense.
Yeah. And, which guys would you say would be best suited for the bridge for you other than Garoppolo? Because I know you've named a bunch, but like if you had to rank like top 3, top 5, who would be up there for you?
Well, let me go back over the pending free agent list, okay? For me, and I know it's hard because, a lot of people have stigmas attached to certain guys. But I'm looking at this, again, with the qualifications that I want. I have boxes that I need to check, right? And I think you understand. I've already explained.
You talked about this.
I've already explained a bunch of them.
Yep.
If you go through the names, you can pretty much figure it out. It's not that hard, right? It's really not. I mean, I'm going to read off of Over the Cap, which is a excellent contractual status NFL website. Okay? I'm going to just read down, let's just say, the top 15 guys based on their salary this past year who are going to be pending free agent quarterbacks. And I'll just tell you right away, check or no check. All right?
Yeah.
Sam Darnold, no check.
No.
Never believed in Sam Darnold. Think the last 2 games are a warning sign for anybody who wants him. But I think it's also possible that the Vikings might retain him on a transition tag anyway. But he's also going to take too much money. Okay? Financial obligation is a big part of this, Aiden.
Yeah,
Remember,
I think it's going to be similar to like what the Giants did based off when the playoff year with Daniel Jones. I think they're going to see like, oh, he won them games, and then they're going to offer him a lot of money.
well, you're going to put incentives in the deal.
Oh, for sure.
No question. No question. Okay? So other guys, again, this is a name, this is the pending free agent quarterbacks based on their average per year salary this past year. And you'll see right away that a bunch of these guys, to me, are automatically off of my list. Zach Wilson, absolutely not. Trey Lance, absolutely not. Jacoby Brissett, absolutely not. Marcus Mariota, he's got some boxes that he checks, but I'm not really overly thrilled.
He won a playoff game, but I mean, he really he's been a backup mostly, and he really didn't show much in Tennessee.
Clearly does not have a better winning resume than Garoppolo.
No.
Not even close. Okay. Drew Lock. Been there, done that. Just saw it. Andy Dalton. 38 years old. That's
up there in age.
that makes him That box is a little bit
mobility.
sketchy for me. Okay? Little
Do you
bit sketchy for me.
For the older quarterbacks, do you value mobility considering the Giants' offensive line? Like how
Well, and
manipulative
that's a very interesting point, and that's part of the reason why I like Jimmy G, because he worked in the West Coast offense in San Francisco, as I just said. He understands getting rid of the ball quick and getting it out. Andy Dalton is not that guy.
No.
Okay? So there's another guy that doesn't check enough boxes. See, you're starting to understand why Jimmy G, for me, is a very obvious choice.
Yeah, well, I commented last week, but the thing I think is that I feel like he was carried by the weapons he had in San Francisco.
And that's fair, because they had really good talent there. There's no
Yeah.
question. I can't say not. But again, I'm trying to fill out boxes here, Aiden, and these other guys aren't filling out as many as he is.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give you some more. Jared Stidham from the Broncos
No way.
doesn't have the resume. Justin Fields doesn't have the resume.
No.
Joe Flacco's got the resume.
Just
Problem
he doesn't
is-
have the mobility.
Mobility is a big problem. He's also not a quick game passer, and he's 40 years old.
Yeah, I mean he did show.
Or about to be 40.
I mean he did show he has something left in him with Cleveland
I agree.
2 years ago.
I don't think though, because he is stationary and he is not a quick game guy, and because of his age, remember, I'm looking at a bridge who might be able to go 2 years. Has Joe Flacco got 2 years left in him if I need it?
I think maybe he has 1 year and he retires. Possibly.
Okay, so Flacco,
So no.
I'm saying he doesn't check as many boxes as Jimmy.
Yeah.
Okay, Jameis Winston, obviously not.
Too many turnovers.
Mac Jones, obviously
No.
not. And now we go to Garoppolo, who made $3.1 million last year with the Rams, and the guys right behind him: Case Keenum, Mason Rudolph, Easton Stick, Taylor Heineke, I'm sorry, of course, and Carson Wentz. And now we're really going downhill. Cooper Rush, Joshua Dobbs, Brandon Allen, Nick Mullins. I mean, Aiden, the list.
Yeah.
There's nobody
Wait,
there who checks
did
nearly
you
as
say-
many boxes as Jimmy G.
Wait, did you say that Dable was with Garoppolo in New England, or was that?
Yes,
somebody
he
else?
was with Garoppolo in New England as an assistant coach for 1 year.
Yeah, so he has. I mean, he has a little bit with him. So.
So, look,
Factor.
I look at facts, I know what I know, and I say to myself, okay, you know what? Sometimes, okay, when you see the color red in front of you, you just look at it and you say, it's the color red. Sometimes it's really simple. The answer is right in front of your eyes, and you don't have to look far.
Yeah, that's why.
And Jimmy G is sticking out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, that's why you should be the GM.
No. GMs
Otherwise, I
don't
would
last.
pick
Aiden, I've been doing this for 42 seasons. I just finished my 42nd consecutive season of covering New York Giants football. How many GMs do you know have lasted 42 years with the same team?
0. But
Bingo!
well,
I'm
let
a
me
lot
ask-
smarter than that.
Let me ask.
I
you
know that I would never stick around for 42 years if I was the GM.
Let me ask you this: what person in your 42 years, what decisions do you think the Giants should have made that you say? What percent do you think have actually happened?
Wow. Well, as you probably know from watching Big Blue Kickoff Live, a lot of times over the course of the last 15 years or so that program has been on, the guy who I really wanted them to draft in the first round got taken by somebody else like very shortly before the Giants. So can I say what percentage? I don't know that I can.
Or an estimate?
Estimate? I guess first round picks, maybe for the last 15 years, I'm probably at 50%.
Not bad.
You know? But again, I want to make something clear, Aiden.
Sure.
I never predict what the Giants will do. That's what a lot of the writers do. They hypothesize and they predict what the Giants will do. I don't do that.
No.
I look at the situation based on my experience, my knowledge, my understanding of all that I've been taught from so many people in this game, and I say, if I were the GM, this is what I would do. This is what I think might be the best fit for the Giants based on my perspective. I don't take guesses about what they're going to do because, you know what? It's foolish to. I don't have all the information that they have about these players. I don't have the medical files on these players. I don't have the personnel files on these players. I haven't interviewed these players. No. So what do? I look at the numbers. I talk to scouts. I talk to retired coaches. I look at the tape of these players. And I say, you know what? Educated guess. This is a player that I would like. I'll give you a good example, right?
Sure.
I'll give you a really good example. I was very, very high. Last year, my guy was Rome Odunze.
I remember that, yeah.
I figured the Giants, I agreed with John on our Big Blue Kickoff Live program that Malik Neighbors is a better fit for Brian Dable's scheme and system.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. He's a better fit.
Yeah.
If I were the GM, I said I would take Rome Odunze because I'm one who wants to have a big skyscraper in the wide receiver room. And Neighbors was another guy who physically was not that big guy with the huge wingspan and the 50-50 balls and stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that Neighbors is not a terrific player.
No.
And it doesn't mean that I didn't want Neighbors, but if I'm putting a team together, I've got to have a skyscraper in the room. And Odunze fit that to a T. Now, this year, Neighbors put up better numbers than Odunze.
Yeah, I mean, Neighbors was a wide receiver one. Odunze
Correct.
was not.
Correct. So, give me a miss on that. Right? That's a miss. Yeah. But I'm not ashamed to admit it, and I'm not bashful about it. I still stand that Rome Odunze is going to be one hell of a receiver in this league. Now, the year before, I wanted them to draft Tay Banks. I hit that one right on the money. I said I would take Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau. Actually, Thibodeau was my number one choice. Mm-hmm. Neal, I said I would prefer them to take the Carolina offensive lineman, the guy who went to the Panthers.
What's his name?
Oh, why am I forgetting him right now? Give me a second here. I'm going to go to the depth chart. See, I'm very willing to admit my misses. I wanted the Carolina, Ekwonu.
Oh, Ekwonu.
I was like, they got to get Thibodeau, and they've got to get my favorite lineman, Ike Ekwonu. And if Ekwonu goes, because I think he will, I would take Evan Neal.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what happened, actually. Ekwonu went to Carolina. So, I still wound up hitting pretty good on that one.
Yeah.
Very often the Giants will take a guy who I have talked about as a guy I would take because, let's face it, I've been brought up here. This is my frame of reference. I've learned so much from the Giants people. So chances are my biases or what I'm looking for is probably going to closely match what the Giants organization's thinking. But I'm still not going to guess what they're going to do. I'm going to tell you who I like for them.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, they're not listening to your shows and stuff, and they're like, oh, Paul said this, maybe we should do that.
No. Hey, a few years ago, I was big on a project quarterback with Jarrett Stidham.
Oh, nice.
I like Stidham a lot as a project quarterback. Mm-hmm. And they didn't go there. And Stidham, to this point, Really hasn't worked out that well in the NFL.
Nah.
You know, I was big on third round for Davis Webb. I was dying for them to pick Davis Webb. And you know what? They did.
Yep.
But then he never got a chance to play. Everywhere he went, he was sitting behind a first-round quarterback, right?
Eli.
He sat behind Eli Manning. He sat behind Sam Darnold. He sat behind Josh Allen. And then he sat behind Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
Everywhere he went, he was behind a first-round quarterback and never got a chance to play until finally the Giants gave him a chance in that last game a couple years ago against Philadelphia.
Yep.
And he performed very well, didn't he?
He did do pretty well, yeah.
But
Now
never
he's
got a chance to play. You know, so, hey, here's the beauty of it, Aiden. I'm not running from anybody. I tell you the guys I like, why I like them. And if they don't work out, they don't work out. GMs don't hit 100%, and neither do I.
No. Yeah, nobody's perfect. That's the thing.
So, anyways, is that all we got tonight?
Actually, yeah, I have one question for you.
Sure.
About the offensive line, because it's not been able to hold up. Do you think it's more of a luck thing, whoever the Giants bring in at quarterback? Because you could say, like, oh, this quarterback would perform much better in a different system, that kind of thing. Do you think
every quarterback, every quarterback obviously needs an offensive line.
Yeah.
But there are some guys, Sam Darnold's one of them. I still believe what we saw the last couple of weeks in Minnesota. I still think that's the guy who sees ghosts. There are some guys who will wilt a lot quicker under pressure than other guys. You know, if you watch Big Blue Kickoff this week, you know, John and I last week and this week, we talked about there's only 4 elite quarterbacks in the league. Guys who, no matter what, can excel under any circumstance and make a play and pull a game out of their butt.
Who was it?
Right?
Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. So
Now, but of course, Lamar Jackson only does that during the regular season. He's never done very well against better defenses in the postseason.
No.
But regular season quarterbacks, those are the 4 guys.
Yeah.
Those are the elite guys in the league right now. That's it. So anybody else, they're going to need some semblance of a line. You know, Justin Herbert showed that, you know, when there's too much pressure on him, he wasn't able to overcome it.
Yeah.
Matthew Stafford's done that sometimes during his career, but it kind of fades in and out.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. I mean, sometimes the offensive line shows, even with those elite quarterbacks like Mahomes in the Super Bowl against Tampa Bay when they were all banged up.
Well, it's just, here's the point. If your line is functional, and you know I love to use that word, functional is the standard, right? If your offensive line is functional, there's a whole ton of quarterbacks who can do really, really well with a functional line. Okay? Then there are other quarterbacks that a functional line still kind of bothers them some.
Yeah.
You know, they start getting a little shaky, a little skittish. And then you got guys who, when the line is less than that and it's poor, well, you'll have some guys who can somewhat overcome that, and then you'll have guys who just get swallowed up. And if the line is poor, they have no chance at all.
I mean, we've seen that with the Giants so many times. I mean, especially the historically bad offensive line in 2023.
And that's why, right. So that's why you got to be very careful, okay? The Giants' offensive line, for the most part this year, despite 10 different starting offensive line combinations, despite that, for most of the season, it was functional.
Agreed.
Okay? It was functional. So that's another reason. I say to myself, can Jimmy G function with a functional offensive line? I think the answer is yes. Now, if the line was terrible, like it was last year, remember, last year, historically bad, I would not think about Jimmy G. Okay? Because now it is much more important. If you had that bad of a line, it would be much more important to have crazy legs back there. And as somebody called up Big Blue Kickoff Live today and said Marcus Mariota.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you might need somebody who's got a lot more, running ability in his legs if your line was dreg.
I mean, you say he doesn't check your boxes, but I would say the most mobile out of the free agent class, I would say Justin Fields.
Justin Fields, absolutely. Even Taylor Heineke was not afraid to tuck it down and run. But I think the line is better than just terrible. I don't think they're there anymore. I think they've graduated past being terrible.
Yeah, it's just I feel like it happens every year. There's nothing around it. I mean, just bad luck with the offensive line getting injured. I mean, like you said, we had 10 different offensive line combinations.
I know.
It's unfortunate.
So that's where I'm at, Aiden. I appreciate you calling in.
All right, good to talk to you.
All right, you too. Take care.
All right,
Be well.
Be well.
All right. Always a fun call. Aiden, one of our guys who always comes in and gives us a video call. Again, folks, there's the link down there. You can give us, in fact, I'm going to put it over there in the chat again. You can call us. Don't be shy. You can go here with a video or audio call. You don't have to, here's the link. You don't have to go to a video call. You can just as well, give us a call. Keep your camera closed. We don't have to make it a video call if you don't want to. What else do we have here? Well, Scott Young talks about Jim Burt's hit on Montana, for sure. No doubt we remember that. All right, let's see what else we got here. Mikey C says, trading for Joe Milton is no different than drafting a quarterback or signing one as a bridge. Mikey C, it's totally different. The bridge quarterback is going to have in my book, the bridge quarterback has a lengthy winning resume. Joe Milton has no such thing. It is a huge difference. Now, if you want to tell me that you want to take a shot on Joe Milton as a prospect quarterback and not draft one this year and see if you can deal a third rounder for him or a fourth rounder for him, that's a different story. Okay? But I'm sorry. In no way, shape, or form is he a bridge. That's not even close. Okay, Lewis says, that may be true then, but he's still better than Jimmy G. I wouldn't mind Flacco or Mariota. Cousins is done as well. Lewis, here's the thing. Honestly, it's great that, after Daniel Jones got benched and then asked for his release following the Carolina game, I immediately turned my attention to how are the Giants going to deal with this. And immediately, after a couple of days of going through all my own analysis, I said, this is what they need to do. They need to get a veteran bridge quarterback who's got blah, 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 and I've already mentioned all the kinds of boxes that he needs to you. I immediately got on my horse before anybody else started thinking about this. And then with about a month or so to go in the season, I finally revealed on one of the shows, it might have been this show or Big Blue Kickoff Live, that, okay, I put the checklist together, and I know I got my guy. And I held that back for a few weeks. But then I said Jimmy G. And, of course, what happened? I got a tremendous amount of heat. people didn't like the plan. They wanted to insist on drafting a quarterback at the number 3 pick. They didn't want to hear anything about a bridge. And then the last couple of weeks of the season played out. And now we're into the off season. And now all of a sudden, Lewis, guess what? A lot more people are seeing it my way. I got a ton of backers now who are saying, go for the bridge quarterback. Now, I got a lot of people who are on board with Jimmy G too. But not as many. That's okay. We can always agree to disagree. I do appreciate, though, the amount of supporters I now have on the side of going for the bridge quarterback. It is obviously the most logical way to go. That, I think, is true. Others who want to disagree can take the riskier side. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Okay? There's nobody right or wrong here. It's about what's more risky, what's less risky. I think the thing that I've planned out, the diagram that I've planned out, my blueprint, really reduces the risk as much as possible and gives you the best chance for positive production. So I think those who do not believe in the bridge are taking more risk. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Okay. But with all these folks jumping on the bandwagon and hopping into my boat for the bridge quarterback, there can be a lot of guys, we just went over the list. There's a lot of guys who, could be bridge quarterbacks. There's a lot of them. There's a bunch of them. We went over about 15 to 20 of them just a few minutes ago. You got to decide, if you're the GM, you have to decide which guy checks the most boxes for you. Now, the only thing that I do is that when I go through my checklist, I do say, okay, based on the circumstances surrounding the New York Giants, the players they have, the division they play in, the weather they play in, the money they have, the age of the roster, the situation that they don't have any other QB signed, although Tommy DeVito's an exclusive rights free agent. I look at all of those things, plus their draft position, and I say, okay, here's my checklist. Jimmy G checks more boxes than anybody for my checklist. Lewis, if somebody else checks more boxes for you, that's fine. It doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make me wrong. It's all about preference. That's all. And you may have a different checklist than I do. And that's probably the case. Because anybody who has the checklist that I have, I don't see anybody else coming close to checking the boxes that Jimmy G does. So my anticipation is that the guys who want Justin Fields, the guys who want Marcus Mariota, the guys who want to take a chance on Trey Lance, their checklist is obviously way different than mine. Way different. But see, I've got this forum because of the job that I do. So if I'm going to give you a name, I'm going to tell you why. I'm not just going to pull a name out of a hat. This isn't a magician with a rabbit. I'm not doing that. I'm going to tell you this is the name that I've come up with because he checks the most boxes on my checklist. You can't dispute that. Just like I can't dispute who checks the most boxes on your checklist. That's okay. That's perfectly okay. Mikey C. The G-Men need another Joe in the building. Have Joe versus Jimmy battle for starting quarterback. Joe can learn from Jimmy too. Scott Young says, I agree with you, Paul. I'd rather have Jimmy G than Russell Wilson. I just don't feel like Russell Wilson's a team guy for some reason. Lewis, well, you wrote this a little bit before I had my little conversation because you say you're wrong, but we'll see. No, Lewis, nobody's wrong. That's where, unfortunately, you've made the mistake. Nobody's wrong. Your checklist can be different than mine. Let's see. Timothy Minays, he's one of our regulars. Paul, what do you think of Carson Wentz as a bridge? I think there's still some juice with him. That's an interesting one. He's been in the division. We know that. He has won games, has been to the playoffs, has some mobility. Timothy, what really bugs me about Russell Wilson, I'm not so sure that he's very adept at the quick game and getting the ball out fast. Some quarterbacks are better than that than others. They've been trained at it. They've been in those systems. I'm not sure that Wentz really has that in him. Let me take a look at something here. Wentz, let's see, he's 32 years old, so your age factor is good. Okay, that's certainly good. Let's see, what else do we have here? Valuation according to Over the Cap. Oh, wow. They think his valuation is only $1.5 million for the season. They're not putting very much stock in Carson Wentz at all based on their computations in terms of the salary that he can command. You know, here's what I'll tell you, Timothy. I suppose he would check some boxes. Again, we've talked about some a moment ago that he would check. I think he's skittish. He's one of those guys who I think when the line is functional, he's already starting to show signs of making mistakes. I think he'd be a consideration. Again, if Jimmy G were off the board, and I know he likes being with the Rams, he wants to start for somebody, and he's looking to prove himself again as a starter, and has a very strong desire to do so. I would still rather have Jimmy G because he checks more boxes. Carson Wentz checks a few of them. If Jimmy G wasn't available, I'd have to start looking elsewhere. I tend to probably go Andy Dalton, to be honest. Let me see something here. Andy Dalton. He's 37. So that doesn't make me real happy on the age deal. Now, what I do like about Dalton is his extensive playoff experience, and he's got a lot more wins on his resume. The valuation for him, according to Over the Cap, is a little bit over $4 million for 1 year, and justifiably so. Again, the negative with him is that he's not going to be very mobile, and I don't need mobility, I need escapability. I need escapability from the pressure in the pocket to make a throw. Mobility is when a quarterback runs around and he's looking actually to carry the ball and run with it. That's mobility. There are guys who lean towards mobility, and then there are guys who lean toward escapability. Escapability means just do enough of footwork to avoid the rush and get the ball out. Huge difference. Escapability quarterbacks don't pile up big rushing numbers. I question Dalton's escapability, and I question his age. Those would be two boxes that I'm not sure I could check. But Timothy, Dalton would be a guy, again, if Jimmy G was off the board, Dalton would be a guy I would consider. Scott Young says, I feel he isn't a team guy, meaning Russell Wilson. Well, there have been some things said about him. I'm not going to say there haven't been. Scott Young says, Timothy, sorry, but a huge no on Wentz for me. Oh, Christine says good night, and that was about 20 minutes ago? No, a little more than that. Actually, about 45 minutes ago. Good night, Christine. Hey, Christine, sorry. Maybe you'll catch us on the archive. Eamon Perry says Brady was a sixth rounder too. Well, yeah. I went over my quarterback chart. I think it was on last week's show, didn't I? E-Man, were you with us on that show when I told you about what the facts are regarding quarterbacks? Let me go to that one more time, since we're on the program right now, and there may be people who did not have that ability to listen to that. Super Bowl quarterbacks. We will call that up. Let's see if I got that in my computer handy right off the bat. Super Bowl quarterbacks. Let's see where is it? Okay. I think that would be this one. Nope, that's not the file. Let me see if I can find that file a second. Here we go. This one? No, it's not this one. I got to find this file. Where is this file? It's got all that stuff on it that I was talking about. Dang. Why can't I find that? Here it is. So, starting quarterbacks in the Super Bowl since the 2000 season. Okay, there have been 27 different starting quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. 27 since the 2000 season. Only 15 of the 27 were first-round picks. That is 55.5%. That's it. 15 of the 27 different quarterbacks that have started the Super Bowl since 2000 were first-round picks. That means 12 were not first-round picks. Something to think about. A lot of people don't want to think about that, but those are the facts. There you go. Mikey C. says Tom and Joe. Yeah, that's right. Brady and Montana. Drafted a lot later. Of course, they, they don't always quite. Montana's not part of this, obviously. Much older. But those are the facts, right? Those are the facts. 12 out of the last 27 starting Super Bowl quarterbacks were taken after the first round or were undrafted. 12 out of 27. Almost half. But there are some people who just don't want to believe facts. They'd rather just dance in La La Land and insist on things that they don't know about. Cecil McCatherine says he would like Cousins and Milton. Well, Cecil, there you go. We may disagree about the player selection, but you're one of those guys who's obviously bought into the plan of a bridge quarterback who might give you 2 years and a project quarterback behind him. So, Cecil, you can take a seat in my boat anytime. We may disagree on the names, but you got the plan. He says Cousins will get cut. Just wait the Falcons out. He might. Mikey C says he have talent and have your boy Jimmy be his bridge quarterback. So you want to go Jimmy G and Milton, Mikey C. Again, now you've clarified, right? You said you want to go for Milton, just like Cecil said. And you're going to make him the project quarterback. Okay. See, if you go for the project quarterback, that does not preclude you from drafting a prospect quarterback in 2026. You could always do that the following year. As long as your bridge veteran is good. Nothing wrong with that at all. That's why this blueprint makes so much sense. That's why it's the most logical blueprint. Aiden says Dalton is 0-4 in the playoffs. Yes, Aiden. I know. That's why he's not above Jimmy G for me. Again, been to the playoffs a bunch of times, won a slew of games in his career. I'd rather have a guy who's at least been to the playoffs multiple times than a guy who hasn't. But yes, Aiden, again, Dalton is not my primary guy. Cecil says, nobody is saying Bridge, but he can be the future. Or again, I think you're talking about Milton there. You said you wanted Cousins and Milton. You're talking about that again. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, Mikey C says, I'm at work. Definitely another time. No problem, Mikey. Let's see. Cecil says, bargain spending, bargain results. You got to pay to play. Don't be cheap with the most important position. Well, again, I'm not necessarily talking about being cheap. What I'm talking about is the Bridge can be a guy who is looking to reprove himself, a guy who has a substantial winning resume, has a track record of success, and for whatever reason, whether it was injury or whether it was he was in a bad situation, and all right, so for the last year or two, things haven't gone exactly the way he wanted to. Kurt Warner, Kerry Collins, look what happened to their careers. Sidetracked. Nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted Geno Smith either. And look, he was absolutely rock bottom, the muck of NFL quarterbacks. And he got to Seattle, and they were like, oh, look at this. All of a sudden, boom. He winds up being the starter, and he's put together 3 really good years. That's what happens. You can have a guy like that. That's what the Giants need to do. They need to get a guy who wants to have a second boost in his career. And you don't have to pay a ton to get one of those guys, Cecil. That's the point. You don't. You prey on their desire to resuscitate and have a second go-round in the league. You want a guy who's motivated, big time motivated, to say, hey, I still got it. I can win in this league again, and I'm going to show you. That's what you want. You want one of those guys because you'll get really good value. Really good value. Let's see here. Isaac Mars says, not paying for a broken bridge. Okay. If you're talking about Jimmy G, he's not broken right now. He's actually had a lot of time off. Got to play 1 game at the end of the season against Seattle last year, and he lit him up pretty good. Mikey C says, the G-Men need to draft Abdul Carter because playmakers on defense are more important. Mikey C, again, we're different on the name, but we're not different on the plan, right? You got the bridge quarterback, you got the project quarterback, so you're with me there, and you're with me on drafting a premier defensive player at number 3. I'm with you. I'd probably lean toward, in fact, I've said this, I think Travis Hunter's the best player in the draft. And if he's sitting there at 3, I'd much lean toward him. I'm really thinking about taking Graham as the defensive tackle out of Michigan as my second choice, to be honest. But you can't go wrong with Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State, or Mike Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan. You can't. These are 4 blue chip players, and they all happen to be on defense, which the Giants also happen to need. Iman Perry says, Dable and Shane might not be here in 2026. Mara's about run out of patience. Man, that's why the Giants need to win games this year. That's exactly why you need a bridge quarterback who has a bunch of wins in his pocket. That's exactly why. Because if you go with a young guy, and most young guys don't win right away, you take a chance on a guy who doesn't have experience, who hasn't won a ton of games, and things get awfully hot in New York. You know, the heat by the media and the fans when you don't do well, we've seen that over the last decade. It is a pressure cooker. You don't want to put a guy like that in a situation like what the Giants are going through with a brutal schedule in 2025. I just don't see the sense in doing that. It is a mega risk. I mean, the odds of you having like a 3 or 4 win season again because you threw a young guy into that fire are probably pretty good. And then you're going to wind up blowing the whole thing up and starting all the way back negative, not even at 0. You're going to be way, way back. I don't think anybody really wants to do that. Cecil, Giants will have the 3rd pick in 2025 or 2026 draft. Well, they do have the 3rd pick in the 2025 draft, as it stands today. Cecil, it's one of the reasons why my perfect blueprint is actually this. If the Giants are number 3 and I'm the general manager, what I'm doing is this. After I sign Jimmy Garoppolo in March, I'm going to shop that number 3 pick. And I am going to hope that I can get the Raiders at number 6 to come up to number 3. Hoping that either Tennessee or Cleveland take at least one quarterback. If the other team hopefully takes, let's say they take Travis Hunter, for argument's sake. The point is, if one quarterback is still on the board at 3, and hopefully it's Sanders because the Raiders and Sanders seem to have a lot of attraction in the media. If that's true, I want to hold up the Raiders for that pick. I will trade down from 3 to 6 and let the Raiders come up. By all means, go take Sanders at 3. Las Vegas Raiders, you're going to give me not only your number 6 pick, because at 6 now, if the 2 quarterbacks are gone, and let's say Hunter's gone, guess what? That means Johnson, Graham, and Carter are still left on the board. Which means by the time I'm up at 6, I'm getting one of the top 4 defensive players in this draft. Because I'm 3 spots away, and there are 3 blue-chip defensive players still on the board. But I'm telling the Raiders, if you really want to go up and get that quarterback at number 3, you're going to pay me for it, man. Not only are you going to give me your 6 so I can swap places and still get a primo defensive player, you're giving me next year's number 1, and you're giving me next year's number 2. You sure are. That's what you're going to give me. And I'm not settling for less. Now, if you're not going to make that trade with me, Las Vegas Raiders, I'll just stay at 3. And if Travis Hunter's already gone, then I'm taking Graham out of Michigan. I got no problem doing that. Nope. None whatsoever. I'm fine with that. But see, if you are going to pony up and you're going to push that shopping cart over to me and you're going to give me your 1st and 2nd round picks in 2026, I'm taking those 2 draft picks and I'm stashing them in my pocket. And Cecil, you know what I'm doing with that? I'm using those 2 picks as potential collateral. Because now, if my project quarterback in 25 doesn't work out, and I need to draft a high first-round quarterback in 2026, guess what I got in my pocket, Cecil? I now have the Raiders' first and second-round picks as ammunition to move up in the 2026 draft and to go get one of the highly sought-after quarterbacks in the class of 26. You see, I've already thought about all the different ways that this can play out. That's why I spend as many hours as I do thinking about this stuff. Endless nights am I up. People who know me, they don't know where I get the energy from, but I love the game. And I love playing all of the different roles, head coach, coordinator, GM, because I don't have the pressure of being in those roles for real. I can play those roles in a pseudo way. So you see, Cecil, that's why you do it. You go with the game plan that I just penciled out for you, and now you got an extra first and an extra second going into the 26th draft. And if you need to get a really high first rounder to go get the QB you want, you now have the collateral in your pocket to go make a move. There are only so many ways, right? So many ways that you can play this. Some are more logical than others. Some are more riskier than others. I just gave you a pretty darn good blueprint, though, didn't I, Cecil? Because I'm taking care of your question. Your biggest question there about having a high pick in 2026, I just took care of that for you. All right, let's keep going here. Mikey C says the Giants don't need to draft a quarterback this year. Defense is what they need built to win. Joe Milton can be used as a future. I agree with Jimmy G as the starter. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, Mikey C says Joe Milton has Kerry Collins' arm strength with legs. Boy, does he have a cannon. And by the way, Kerry Collins, in my opinion, had the strongest arm that I've ever seen of any Giants quarterback. Now, I go back to Fran Tarkenton, okay? So even though I've only covered the team for 42 years, I remember watching Tarkenton play for the Giants. I've never seen a quarterback in a Giants uniform with a stronger arm than Kerry Collins. I will tell you, short range, 10 to 15 yards, the other guy who had tremendous zip on his ball and may have thrown it as hard as anybody, not talking about the long ball or the bomb with arm strength for distance, but a guy who could probably put the ball through a plaster wall 15 yards away, Ryan Perrilloux. I wonder how many of you remember him out of LSU. Got bounced up and down the practice squad, I believe, 9 times one season. Ryan Perrilloux. Okay. Scott Young says, I'd consider moving back late into the first round and draft Jackson Dart, so you still have a fifth-year option. Well, Jackson Dart, Scott, is definitely a guy who I would eye. I'd like to think, I don't know, because these guys all rise up the board quickly, these quarterbacks. I'd like to think Jackson Dart could be had in the third round. I'm not sure. You know, I was saying on Big Blue Kickoff Live earlier today that these quarterbacks tend to rise like yeast when you're baking bread. They shoot up the board real quick. All right, let's see. Anybody else? Scott says, again, Scott Young, I'm sorry, but just give me a lot of upset Giants fans with me, but I'm not big on Sanders being taken by the Giants. If that's what they do, I'm not sold on him at all. He holds the ball way too long, too. That is certainly one of the things that people have said about him. One of the other things that you'll notice is that he is not as quick as maybe you need to be in the NFL when leaving the pocket. BYU found ways to track him down an awful lot in that bowl game. And there was another game this year that I recall being a scout talked to me about, and they said that his escapability against bigger and faster players in the NFL, he's not going to be able to run around back there and buy time and hold the ball as much as he did at Colorado. It's going to be quite an adjustment for him. Scott Young says he would consider Marcus Mariota. Cher Lewis says Fields doesn't check the boxes, but Jimmy D does. What a surprise. Yeah, you know why? Because Jimmy G has actually won playoff games and been a starting quarterback in a Super Bowl. And has a very, very long list of wins on his record. Has been part of a winning program more than once. Justin Fields does not have that. Not even close. So boxes not checked, my friend. Not on my checklist. Maybe on yours. And again, you're entitled to have a different checklist. But Fields doesn't check as many boxes on my checklist. Not at all. Scott Young, I'm thinking Justin Fields might be wanted by a few teams in 2025. I think that's true. But see, those teams don't have to have a guy who has been through the wars and won as many times as a Jimmy Garoppolo. See, Fields, with his limited resume, is probably better suited going to a team that has not had to go through as much pain as the Giants. He's a younger quarterback who's going to come in not thinking he's a bridge. Fields is going to come into a team in a situation thinking, I'm the starter and I want to dig my roots here and I'm going to be here for 4, 5, 6 years. He's not going to come in thinking he's a bridge for 1 or 2 years. Fields is going to be thinking that he's still so young and early in his development that he's not going to be okay with being a bridge. His motivation is going to be totally different than a bridge quarterback who's going to say, I've won before. This is a nice spot for me to see if I can reclaim some of my glory of the past. I'm glad you brought that up, Scott, because it allowed me to further explain a box that Fields does not check. He checks a different box for a different checklist. The Giants are not in that situation. Now, if they take a shot at Justin Fields, it means that they are much more willing to go for a younger quarterback who thinks of himself as a long-term starter. I don't think they do. If I were the GM in their situation, I would not. Again, I'm not going to predict what they're going to do. If they are in that situation in their minds and that's their checklist, then Justin Fields will fit that checklist. I don't see it, but the team knows, the GMs, the guys who do this for a living, they know better. So if their checklist says that they need that type of quarterback, then Justin Fields checks a bunch of those boxes. That's fine. Again, there's no right or wrong here. What's wrong is if you pick a guy, right? If you're the GM and you pick a guy who doesn't check the most boxes on your checklist, then you've made the wrong decision. Because as the GM, it's your responsibility to check the guy or to sign the guy who checks the most boxes. That's what you're responsible to do. And if you don't, then you failed. Okay. Let's see here. Shanita Jackson, why not Fields or Jameis Winston as potential bridge quarterback? Well, I've already talked about Fields. Winston, to me, too erratic, too much of a turnover machine, and quite frankly, does not have enough of a winning pedigree for me. And I also suppose that Winston, probably because he's still on the younger side, I also suppose he probably is also more of a Fields mentality, that he's going to want to go somewhere and land there and dig his roots in. I don't think he's going to be of the mentality of being a bridge quarterback that's going to want to mentor the next prospect who might be taking his job within a year. I just don't see that. So she mentions they're both younger and less injured than Jimmy G. They are both younger. Again, but that can also be a problem because of what I just explained. Remember, a bridge quarterback, like Aaron Rodgers, has always shown a negativity to his backup quarterbacks. He doesn't like knowing that backup quarterbacks are young and talented and around him and are going to have to be groomed to potentially one day take his spot. That was a problem in Green Bay. Okay? That was a problem with Tom Brady in New England. He wasn't happy that they got Garoppolo. He wasn't happy they got Brissett. That's a problem. You can't sign a bridge quarterback who thinks he's more than a bridge. Because a bridge quarterback, by identification and by definition, is a veteran quarterback who feels confident enough in his winning ways and ability that he's going to go out there, resuscitate his career, help the young fellow behind him who may be the future of the team that they're both on, and then think to himself, well, you know what? If the young guy comes along quickly and does real well and they really like him, after a year, I may be out of here. That's what happened with Kurt Warner. Signed a deal with the Giants. Goes 5-4. Eli takes the job. Season's over. Kurt Warner says, I've done enough. I showed that I had a second wind in my career. He goes and signs with the Arizona Cardinals and leads them to a Super Bowl. It worked out great for Kurt Warner. It worked out great for the Giants. That's what you need. Kurt Warner was exemplary, a pro's pro. He knew when he came here, he was the bridge, and he did everything he could to help Eli Manning, knowing full well that if things went a certain way, that he would be pushed aside, and that was okay with him, because as long as he had an opportunity to prove that he could still play, he knew he would get another job somewhere else, and he was fine with that. He was using the Giants as much as the Giants were using him. That's what a bridge quarterback is. And he's got to be good enough that if you need him for 2 years, he can be a 2-year bridge instead of 1. Fields and Winston don't fit that mold. Okay. Before we get to some more of those, it looks like we got Tremaine on the stage here. So let's bring him in. Here we go. How you doing, my man?
How you doing?
I'm okay. Good to talk to you. What's going on today?
Just had a question. Why do you think they waited so long to make that decision to trade Daniel in mid of the season?
Well, the problem with Jones was that once he was signed and they knew that this year was going to be the pivotal season for him, what they were trying to see if there was any way that the team's fortune would turn around and they could stay in the race and then potentially see if Jones was going to be able to have a solid second half of the season, and maybe they'd wind up keeping him. But that didn't happen. They were hoping against hope that things would work out. But here was the problem, Tremaine. The Giants were 2-3, right?
Right.
And it was like, all right, let's see what goes on in the next 3 or 4 games. Let's see how it turns out. That month was very pivotal for them because once they started to go downhill and got deeper and deeper under 500, it put the Giants in a bad spot because now the hole was too big for them to climb out of. And there was no way that Daniel Jones could salvage the season. Once they knew that, they were worried about the injury guarantee that would greatly cripple their salary cap in 2025. So they had no choice at that point. And if you recall, now let me go back over this with you. The Giants are 2-3, okay, after they lose to the Bengals. No, after they beat Seattle to go 2-3.
Yeah.
So they were in position actually to still salvage something. But then they lose to Cincinnati in a game that they easily could have won and I think should have won. But again, drop passes, key penalties, unclutched play. Then they get belted by Philadelphia. So now all of a sudden, you're sinking really fast. And now they got to play Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh. If you remember, that game, they should have won that one too. How did they lose that game? They really lost that game because the Steelers got a punt return for a touchdown that never should have been allowed because there should have been a roughing the kicker on the play.
Right.
That game never should have been lost. Now, at that point, the Giants are now losers of the Bengals, the Eagles, and the Steelers. They've lost 3 in a row, and now they're 2-6. I knew right then, to be honest with you, when they lost the Steeler game, I said to myself, oh no, this season is not going to be salvaged. There's probably nothing that Daniel Jones is going to be able to do to pull this thing out of the fire. And I started to think to myself, after they lost to Pittsburgh, I said flat out in my own head, if they don't beat Washington and Carolina and get 2 of these wins back right away, that the bye week is going to be the end. Because they're going to be too far under 500 and they're going to be cooked. And once they fell too deep into the hole, the injury clause in his contract was going to prove fatal to him. So that's really what happened, my friend. That's it.
Okay. All right.
I gave you as complete an explanation as I could give you.
And I appreciate it because I was looking at that game and I'm like I'm looking like we're 2-3. I'm like Daniel was kind of playing good. I mean I know about the ACL and he controlled overnight that was getting where it needed to be, and I'm playing myself. I don't want him to be the same Daniel. I don't want him to be the same Daniel. And I'm seeing throws and I'm like, we should have won this game. I'm like, why they stop throwing? Like, what's going on? Like, is he injured? What's going on? Then it's like after the 5 week, like you said, it went downhill from that.
Well, even the Carolina game, right? What happened in the Carolina game? Now, I know there were plays, there were passes that he missed during the game. But ultimately, how did they lose the Carolina game? Tyrone Tracy fumbled in overtime.
Yeah. Well, he should never did. He actually did a good job that game.
I know. Tremaine, I think we're losing your signal.
No,
There you are.
But
so, I mean, there were a bunch of games. I've said all along that there were in the first 2/3 of the season, there were 4 games, in my opinion, the Giants gave away to charity. And they were not Daniel Jones' fault, but it was a combination of bad turnovers by the skill position players, untimely penalties, right? They took 2 touchdowns in 2 different games off the board, okay, with penalties, and drop passes. The Giants led the league in drop passes this year. And the first half of the season, it was horrific. They were dropping passes like Niagara Falls. So that's what happened.
Kind of happened with Gambling, But do you think there will be a chance for Jada Hiding to show what he's worth?
I'm sorry, who's that?
Do you
Jalen
think?
Hyatt?
Do you? Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
think
you
it
know
would be a
what?
chance for him to either be the wide receiver two, or at least show some skills?
I think that Darius Slayton is probably going to get a nice financial package from a team that's either warm weather climate that stresses a lot of deep balls or
Mm,
even a dome team. So I think Slayton is probably going to get a rich deal that's going to prompt him to go, which means the Giants are now going to be down to Robinson and Neighbors, and Hyatt is going to have to step up as one of those top 3 receivers. Now,
yeah.
I will tell you, Tremaine, I've said on this show and Big Blue Kickoff Live as well, I am a big supporter of Jalen Hyatt. His work ethic, he's a really good kid. He's a terrific teammate. And I think he can be a lot more than what we've seen. But for some reason, to this point, he seems to have been buried. And I feel bad because it's a mystery to me. I think he's got the ability to be really good. But to this point, we just haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. I mean, it's a reason why the Giants should, to be frank with you, they should bring in another wide receiver, either a veteran, medium-priced veteran, or a mid-range draft pick to compete. They should bring in another guy to compete and to push Hyatt to either be a top 3 receiver or to beat him out as a top 3 receiver. They can't just give him that spot because based on his production in his first 2 seasons, it would be foolish to just give him the spot.
Yeah, he gonna have to work for it. I mean, I've seen him in Tennessee play a little bit. He got speed on him. I think I just don't like where I don't know if it was hype, but they were talking about he could have been that one. Like I thought this year would have been either year just to not bust out for 1,000 yards, but at least show some like Robinson slot type things. You know what I'm saying? Or get some deep passes down the field. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will tell you, Tremaine, and it's not a big factor, but it's got to be somewhat of a factor. The fact, when you look at the Giants, they had 4 different starting quarterbacks this year.
Yeah.
And that definitely impacted the passing game. It had to. I mean, and to be frank, I think you know this too. Daniel Jones was by far the most talented of the 4 quarterbacks they played this year.
He was.
He was the most talented. So when the injury clause boxed him into a corner and forced him to the bench, and then he asked for his release, and they were classy to give it to him, but when you started putting guys like Locke and Boyle and DeVito out there was no way to expect that you were going to get consistent play of the talent level of a Daniel Jones, because those guys are not as talented as Daniel Jones. And that definitely hurt all the receivers. I mean, Drew Lock had that one sensational game against the Colts, and I will never take that away from him. He was dynamite that day. But it also happened to be the best game of Drew Lock's career. He didn't do that in the other 3 games that he started.
Do you what's another? I got another question for you.
Okay.
I know you said you don't know what they're gonna do in the draft, but what do you think will be? Because I know I saw what John Mara has said, and it's like he's tired. He's tired of losing. He said something about the defense, and the defense. He got tired of the offensive team running on us. So, what do you think will be the legitimate, like, besides the quarterback, like, what is that key piece that will be like, okay, I think we might got something here?
Well, I think that it's clear the Giants need a stud defensive tackle, much like Leonard Williams, who, of course, they had until they traded him.
Yeah.
To be frank, and I'm being very honest with you, Leonard Williams was the perfect fit for this defense. He was when he was here, And he's still the perfect fit for this defense, but you can't go get him now. So, I'm looking at Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan. In my opinion, he would be, and he's a blue chip prospect. He'll be a top 5 pick in this draft. Okay? I think he, in my mind, would be an outstanding pick for the Giants at number 3. To me, it's Hunter by Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner at the corner. I would take him a smidgen ahead of Mason Graham, the defensive tackle of Michigan, if I was making a pick that high, in the top 5. I think Graham is not only a terrific talent as a 3-technique defensive tackle, but he would complement Dexter Lawrence perfectly. And, he's coming from a big program. We all know what the Wolverines are. They're a hell of a program. They're usually very strong in the trenches. And this kid can really, really play. And I think, and he happens to be in a position that the Giants desperately need.
Yes, I think that. All right, we need a strong defensive tackle to complement that area that Leonard was playing for. Which I don't know why they let him go in the first place, because Leonard was an awesome, hell of a defensive tackle.
Yep. He was. Remember though, they asked him if he was willing to go, because they knew that they weren't going to make the playoffs, and Seattle had a chance to, and they said, Leonard, do you want to go? We could trade you to a team that's going to make the playoffs. What do you think? And he said he wanted to go. It also got him back to the West Coast. And Leonard Williams is a California guy. He loves the West Coast.
Yeah.
So so I understand. Plus the fact that Leonard obviously makes a lot of money. And the Giants had some cap issues, and they never were going to be able to re-sign him. And Seattle did. They had room, and they paid him big money to stay there.
Yeah.
But I get it. That's why I can't stand the salary cap, Tremaine. I hate the salary cap.
I do. I hate it. Because I really hate it. Because I think my favorite years of watching Giants football was watching Eli Manning throw that ball to David Tyree.
Yep, I got you.
Was it David Tyree that caught on the helmet?
Yeah, 2007, Super Bowl 42.
I watched that in my mom's house in my room.
That was sweet, right?
Yes, and I'm thinking I didn't want to get sacked, and I saw them coming for Eli, and I'm like, no. And he dropped it. I said, please don't drop it. I said, don't drop it. And I saw the helmet catch, and I was just like a kid. 20 minutes, I'm sitting there just looking at TV like, he caught the ball on his helmet. Like, we won the Super Bowl. Like, I'm the type of person when I like the Giants, I like the Justin Tucks, saying the O.C. Yamaura's, and then we had that one stick when we had Mathias Kiwanuka, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I missed the boys like that. Like, I missed the NASCAR package. Like, I missed everything. Like, and I seen the defense right now. I'm like, I'm thinking in my head, like, I don't even care how old Tuck is. Bring Tuck in here, see what he can do. Bring somebody back so I can at least feel happy. Like, you know what I'm saying? But
I hear you, my friend.
I know it's one step at a time, but I know we have to be patient as Giant fans and stuff like that. But, man, it's been a while since we had that trophy, man.
I know.
And it seemed like every time we try to make a right step, we're going backwards. And I'm not giving up on Joe Shane or Brian Daboll, but I see what Shane's doing to try to better this team. We need a franchise quarterback. We need a defensive tackle. I think now I just heard that Jerome is not the defense coach no more.
Jerome Henderson, the defensive backs coach, NFL Network is saying that he won't be back. Now the Giants defensively did give up too many big plays in the passing game this year.
Yes, they
and he was the quarterbacks coach. I happen to think very highly of Jerome Henderson, but for whatever
Deontay
reason.
Banks is a stud, and I need Deontay Banks to be a shutdowner. Like I need
Yep.
somebody, or just at least have somebody to like just coach him. Like to me, I don't think there's nothing wrong with Hawkins. Like
I'm with you.
he got the fit. He's 6'3". You know, this, that, and other. It's just I think they're just too immature because they're still young and they need that presence to help them. Like, okay, don't get burned this spot, come this spot, no, whatever. Because that play against CD Lamb, I saw what you gotta do. I shook my head for like 20 minutes. I said,
I
that cannot
know.
go.
But
That
you know
cannot
what?
go.
The CD Lamb touchdown you're talking about, you know what's interesting about that? And yes, the Giants were playing a lot of off coverage with their corners this year, and
Yeah.
Banks is a press man corner, so it's really not his forte.
No,
Now,
yeah.
did he give up the catch? He gave up the catch. And then Lamb made the cut and he went inside. But here's the problem, okay? The problem is that there should have been a deep safety on the play that would have been the safety net to
Yes.
prevent Lamb from going all the way. And the safety took a bad angle on Lamb. So in reality, while the catch was against Tay Banks, that touchdown was not actually charged to Banks. If you were grading that as a defensive backs coach,
Yeah.
you're grading the safety for making a bad play by getting over there late and taking a bad angle because he should have been able to contain Lamb after he took off with the ball.
Right. That was my first initial because when that happened, I'm like, now I know that he wasn't the only person there. There's supposed to be somebody there. Because 90% of the chance, whoever was there, it might have still been a catch because it's freaking CeeDee Lamb. Like,
Oh, it's going to be a catch, and it's a
yeah, it's
big
gonna be
play.
CeeDee Lamb, but it would have been more difficult with two people instead of just like you said, he played press. I know he played press. He better in the press. I've seen him play it a little bit.
Yep.
But that's his specialty is the press. And to see that, I'm like, where the other even with the help, it might have been instead of being a touchdown, it might have been on the 20, might have been on 30. We don't know.
I know. We don't know. But see, unfortunately, a lot of people just ate up Banks for that play, and they're like, well, he gave up the touchdown. Not really. He gave up the catch.
He gave up the catch. He didn't give up the touchdown.
That's right.
People, it goes like this. Even if you get burnt, if you give up that yard, that's where you have that protection for the other person to help you, so you won't get burnt for that touchdown.
That's
so even
right.
though he gave up that catch, that touchdown wasn't his fault. There was nobody there. He actually died because it looked like he was going to interception. I think he died for it.
I think that the issue right now with Banks is that when they ask him to play zone and off coverage, because that's not what he's been used to doing his whole life, I think he's had a tremendous amount of trouble adjusting to it. Because the thing about Banks is, when he was playing press and man, he was beating up a lot of receivers. And yes, he was a little physical and a little too grabby. But the thing is, he never had to learn how to close on the ball. And a lot of times, when he was playing at Maryland, they didn't even throw at him because they knew he was blanketing the receiver. So Banks has now had to not only develop how to close on the ball, but he's had to develop better ball skills because the ball, even when you're covered in the NFL, those receivers and quarterbacks are good enough. They're going to throw at you. And those receivers will make plays.
Yeah.
And so he's had a very difficult time adjusting to the change in the scheme. And I feel bad because people are definitely overly criticizing him. He is a very talented player.
He is. He's a talented player and he's a stud.
Anyway, Tremaine, let me try to get to a couple other people here on the chat because I've been building up a bunch of chats on the side while I've been talking to you. So hopefully we'll get to hear from you again on another show.
All right, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
I will.
Bye-bye. All right. Queensboro brother comes in. Actually, MKM says next season, our season better make the playoffs. Well, that'd be great, MKM. Certainly. I don't know that that's going to happen. That'd be great. Queensboro brother, one of my guys, he's usually here all the time, says, sorry for my tardiness. Didn't want to miss see how the Knicks-Sixers game went. I know you spoke about the kid Dart out of Ole Miss who broke Eli's passing yardage record. What's your insight on the kid? I know a little bit about him from some preliminary. I watched one game, and I understand he's not only obviously very talented, but he does have some mobility. He does have production for sure. We know that. I will be doing a much deeper dive into Jackson Dart as we go forward. Right now, I think with the limited amount that I've done on him, it would not be appropriate for me to speak. But I promise you, Queensboro brother, that is a guy I'm going to do a lot of stuff on because he is a guy who clearly is going to be on the radar, I would think, as the Giants go into the second day of the draft, if they're going to indeed draft a project quarterback. So I don't mean to pass on you, but I'm not going to smoke you with an answer that I'm not prepared to give right now. All right. MKM says, oh my God, the Knicks won, which is a good thing. It certainly is. You know, I knew I had to schedule the program tonight, and I knew the Knicks were playing the Sixers, and I was going to miss the game, but my responsibility was to you guys. So we followed through with the program, and we certainly hope you enjoyed it. But yes, I did miss the Knicks game, and now to hear that they won, well, now I'm missing that game a little bit more, but it's okay because we're talking Giants football, and that's always something that I crave to do each and every night. Okay, Mikey C says, you hit on the head, P. Draft defense this year. Have Joe as a plan and Jimmy a bridge. Draft a quarterback in 26 if neither work. Well, there you go. No doubt. See, Mikey C has the same checklist I do. Cher Lewis says Justin Fields would excite the fan base like nobody else to be a bridge next season. Cher, again, I appreciate your thought, but think about this. Big-time Italian heritage in North Jersey. We know how they embraced Tommy DeVito. So if you're coming at me with one of the boxes on the checklist is excite the fan base, trust me when I tell you, Jimmy G would excite the Italian fan base if he wins some games here. You know what I mean? Trust me on that one. Mike A says, I love Abdul Carter. No question. One of the top 4 players in the draft. Dynamite defensive stud. Cecil McCatherine says, no way you take a DT over an edge unless he is Warren Sapp. Again, I would think very hard about Carter. I told you who my 4 top defensive players are and my 4 top players in the draft. Cecil, you can't go wrong with any one of the 4. I really don't think you can, honestly. And the Giants could have use for any one of those guys. Mikey C says he loves Travis, but Carter is his favorite pick. That's fine. Queensboro Brother says you like Travis Hunter for the pick at 3. He's a phenomenal player both sides of the field. God knows what you need on both sides of the ball. I got no problem with that. Again. But I think Hunter's going to be gone if the 2 quarterbacks don't go 1 and 2. I think Travis Hunter is going to be the guy who breaks up that combination. So if you got a quarterback and Hunter, then you got to sit there at 3. Again, my goal, if I'm the GM, is to bilk the Raiders. Get those 2026 picks. That would be my goal. Because I'm still getting a blue chipper at 6 if I move down 3 spots. And Travis Hunter is gone, of course. If he goes 1 or 2. It just makes so much sense. Okay, Cecil says, that kind of thinking causes Parsons. We ended up with Tony. I'm not sure exactly what style of the thinking you're talking about, but again, you're also talking about much lower in the draft. When you are at number 3, it creates a completely different scenario because you can get a lot more for the pick if you trade. Let's see here. Queensboro brother. Don't pull a guillotine lever, but I've been known to mix my marinara sauce with the Alfredo sauce at times. Oh, no. No, don't do it. He says, have you ever done this at times at the Dottino dinner table? Absolutely not. Oh, my. Why would you do that, Queensboro brother? No. You could have meat sauce. Make your marinara into meat sauce if you want. Oh, my. Sean Jackson says, I don't love Fields at quarterback, but he should be motivated the way his career is going. Yes, he should be. Also, how hot would the Shane and Dable seat be if they pass on Cam or Shador and those quarterbacks turn out to be productive? It's not, even if those guys, all right, Sean, I love the question, but here's the scenario. You pass on the 2 rookie QBs. Let's just say somehow those guys turn out to be good. But if the bridge quarterback you sign also turns out to be good and does become the guy who makes you competitive again, then there's not a problem because you'll win enough games to be around for another year. And if the project quarterback that you draft, maybe on day 2, has some real stuff to offer down the road, nothing wrong with that either. You see, Sean, I know that there are going to be media people and there are going to be fans who will do that. They will care about what the other team got. That's not the way it works in this league. What you do is you care about what you got. If you got good players and those players help you win games, it doesn't matter what the other team got. It's all about what you do. So if the other 2 quarterbacks go out and do okay, again, that's a lot to ask. But your bridge quarterback wins just as many games or more, which he probably will, fine. Then everybody's happy. Okay, Cecil says, haven't we learned from last year? Teams will not budge no matter what you offer. If the team also needs a quarterback, just look at the Commanders. Yeah, but Cecil, if I'm the GM, I'm not moving at 3 to go up and get one of those quarterbacks. I'm not. I don't care. I'm not going up. Okay? I could potentially move down and try to bait somebody else into giving me a shopping cart full of picks. And if they don't want to, okay. So I'm taking Hunter, or I'm taking Graham, or I'm taking Johnson and Carter. Doesn't matter. I'm taking one of the 4 stud defensive players. It's a win-win for me. Mikey C says, Kerry had a rocket. He sure did. Oh, uh-oh. Mikey C says, P-Dot, there you go again. Jinx players. Dart now a top 10 pick. Oh, my goodness. All right, let's see. Football Handicapper says, why haven't the Giants ever drafted a black quarterback? That's actually incorrect. They have. Do you remember Andre Woodson out of Kentucky? Drafted some years back. He was. Do you think that's a possibility this year? I hope so. And I'm White. It seems John Mara only tell you to... no, your statement's incorrect. They drafted Andre Woodson out of Tennessee some years ago, and he was a black quarterback. So I'm sorry. That's incorrect. But I'm glad you asked the question because it gave me a chance to straighten it out. Let's see. Sean Jackson. Since Brandon Brown is currently still with the Giants, can Shane pick Brandon's brain on how Philly is so strong on both sides of the trenches and got quarterback production, whether Wentz, Foles, and Hurts? Well, I would think that's part of why Brandon Brown is here, because they saw what a great job he did in Philadelphia, and we know that the Eagles built it from the inside out by working the trenches on the defensive and offensive lines. So yes, I would hope that's part of it. Remember, Brandon Brown's been here now for a couple of years, and indeed, they did address the O-line to the point where from historically bad, it's now become pretty functional. I'd like to see it do better. I think we would all like to see the offensive line do better. Even John Mara said priority number 3 was offensive line depth. Mike C. says, Fields to the Jets. Laugh out loud. Maybe. Who knows? Football handicappers rather have Fields over Jimmy G. Then he says, no way Winston. No shot, says football handicappers. He also says Fields ultimately will be better than a bridge quarterback. Again, that's part of the problem. Remember that. That is part of the problem. Fields will not see himself as a bridge, which will then cause an issue. You don't want that. You want a guy who understands what his role will be as a bridge. Football handicapper says, Warner seemed way more washed up under Coughlin, and it was in Arizona where he got his mojo back. Well, not really. Arizona was a better team, and that's why Warner was able to get them to the Super Bowl. But Warner totally resuscitated his career with the Giants. He had nobody wanting him that much in free agency. And why do you think the Giants were able to get him? Because he had no takers. He leaves the Giants, and Arizona was very quick to get him to a contract because Warner had proven that he had a lot left in the tank. So no, football handicappers, I covered that team. I was there every day. You don't quite have that scenario correct. You also say, football handicappers, you don't need a bridge quarterback. We need a full-time bona fide first stringer. Yeah, but the problem is there are none. Okay. Shea Lewis. Well, you're using the example of the Giants pass yard quarterback in the draft, so technically they are not a bridge. I don't understand the comment. The bridge quarterback is the veteran you bring in with the intent that that guy might play 1 or 2 years for you while a younger quarterback gets mentored and tutors under him. That is what a bridge quarterback is. So I don't know what kind of football dictionary you're using, but it's not helping you out in this case. Oh, Mikey C. P-Dot, should the Giants hire Webb as offensive coordinator? Look, I'm a big Davis Webb fan, and I think it's awesome that he's the quarterback's coach in Denver, working with Bo Nix, another guy who I really liked last year, coming into the draft. I think Davis Webb would be really better off, myself, as an offensive coordinator somewhere. I think he should stay maybe for 1 more year. If I were him, I would advise him to stay with maybe Sean Payton for another year, learn some more, then maybe go get an OC job, and at some point perhaps be a head coach. I'm a huge Davis Webb fan. All right. Let's keep going. Football handicappers is still on the board here. My goodness, we have gone 3 hours. I'm going to try to finish up these chats and then get out of here because it's a long day. Football handicapper says, I hope for Jones's sake he finds success with another team. I certainly hope so as well. He's not Saquon, but we see how much better even he became behind a competent offensive line. How did they lose 2 other games? Neighbors dropped the ball late. Yep, that's true. You had the game in Washington, and then you had a game against Dallas at home, where it would have greatly enhanced the Giants' chances of winning two games during the first half of the season. That would have been, let's see, would have been 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what? Well, no, the Dallas game was the 3rd game of the year. The Washington game was Dallas game was the 4th game of the year. I'm looking up at the schedule. The Washington game was the 2nd game. So games 2 and 4. Yes. Malik Neighbors, by my count, had 11 drops this season, which if you merge that with some other people who keep drops around the league, I think it would have been 3rd for most drops in the NFL this year. But he only had 1 drop over the final 5 weeks of the regular season, which just goes to show you how much of a problem dropsies were early on for Malik Neighbors. And yes, 2 very, very big drops in the first game against Washington and the first game against Dallas inside the division. Very, very important. No question about it. Sean Jackson, Neighbors had a real good quarterback in college. Malik still produced as a rookie despite a messy Giants quarterback room, but I'm not sure how well Malik will tolerate more consistent quarterback play, especially next season. Sean, another reason why you want a veteran bridge quarterback. A guy who has complete control, who's confident, who's assertive, who's won a ton of games, can handle himself as a leader in the huddle. Absolutely. Another one of the reasons why Jimmy G is perfect for my checklist. Jimmy G will get the ball to Malik Neighbors. Trust me. Football handicappers. Hyatt is of high quality caliber, but is no better than the number 3. And that may be very true. But right now, if Slayton leaves through free agency, he better darn be a really good number 3, because they need a number 3 if Slayton leaves. High quality character, says Football handicappers. Yes, he is. No question. Asking about a pass catching tight end as well. Well, they have one in Theo Johnson. Yeah, before he hurt his foot. Theo Johnson, he's going to be something to watch. Let's see. We go down a little bit more. He's a big fan, Leonard Williams fan. Football handicappers says Giants need a quarterback. Let's see. Sean Jackson. Paul, with the Giants' current quarterback jigsaw these past seasons, I truly miss Eli's great quarterback play, durability, reliability. Never heard to worry about the quarterback with 10 starting. You're right. If you listen to the first 45 minutes of this program, we had Gary Yers on, a member of the the Pro Football Hall of Fame Selection Committee, and he made the strongest case you could ever make for Eli Manning, not just being a Hall of Famer, but a first ballot Hall of Famer. And he gets a vote. So that's good stuff. All right. Let's see. Timothy Menace comes back. Paul, we are drafting so high. Would you be against paying Darnold and building the team around him? Help us go best player available at 3 and compete. I would not touch Sam Darnold. I don't think bringing him back to New York is a very good atmosphere. I think that's a bit of a problem because of his past here. I also don't think that his season, which was good, then not so good, then good again, and then not so good, I'm not of the belief that he is the guy who was really good. I think he's still more of the guy who was not so good. I'm not buying on Sam Darnold on his high points. And I also think He, of course, is thinking of himself as a full-time starter who is going to want very big money. I mean, even the transition tag is $35 million if the Vikings decide they want to go that way and maintain the right of first refusal. Sam Darnold is not going anywhere to be a bridge. No, he's thinking of himself as a full-time starter. Again, that does not check a box. All right. Craig says getting rid of the DBs coaches was a good thing. Craig says Justin Fields versus Jimmy G. Again, for all of my checklist, Jimmy G hands down. Football handicapper says cannot compare DeVito to Fields, please. I'm not. Sanders or Ward or Hunter. I guess that's a completion of his statement. Mikey C says Dart is as talented as a top 2. They just need more polish and game experience, which matters. Okay. Man, we got a bunch of guys here talking about Carter. Let's see. Football headquarters says you go up if it's the guy you want. Okay. I'm telling you, I'm not going up to 1 or 2 under anybody's circumstances, especially not for the price, because this team needs its draft picks and will need its draft picks in 26 as well. So absolutely not. Fran the Scram says Dart is the best quarterback in this draft. You watch it happen. Well, Fran, I'm not going to mock you, because this past combine, I insisted that the 2 best quarterbacks were Derek May and Bo Nix. And I took a lot of heat. Took a lot of heat. You know? Took a lot of heat. Drake May. I'm sorry, Derek May. Drake May. It is late. I'm exhausted. I've been doing this show now over 3 hours. Yes, Drake May and Bo Nix were my 1 and 2 rated quarterbacks in this draft. May turned out to be pretty darn good, and so did Bo Nix. I would have missed on Jaden Daniels, but my complaint on Daniels was that very wiry, runs a lot, gets hit much too much, and I worry about his long-term durability. Well, he had a terrific season. Nobody can deny that. Props to Jaden Daniels. I hope for your sake you last longer than RG3, because durability is still a question mark for Jaden Daniels. We do not know if he will last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years in this league. We do not know that yet. That durability question is going to follow him for several years. And if he maintains his durability, then that is wonderful. Then he will have turned out to be a tremendous pick. But durability is something that only time can tell. Nobody right now, nobody can guarantee you his durability. So we're not going to know for several years if that was right or wrong. Let's see. A whole bunch of guys. Queensboro brother, my apologies on the 2-sauce experiment. Good night to you, Queensboro brother. All right, guys. That's it. I think we're pretty much going to be done here. Aiden, thank you very much again. Asking, will I reveal the next theme episodes? Oh my goodness. For those of you who are interested in the NFL draft, let's just say that next week's show, next Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to be back here on the New York Giants on SI YouTube channel and media network with the Big Blue Kickoff Live. And we have already planned another very special theme show. Now, my guest will not be on for a half hour or 45 minutes because the topic is not as wide as the Hall of Fame debate about Eli Manning and other Giants who may still be on the road to the Hall of Fame. However, I will tell you this. If you're interested in college prospects and the draft, oh yeah, as you look ahead, there'll be something that you're going to want to hear about on next Wednesday's show. I'm going to leave you with that tease, and you will know more about that next Wednesday morning or next Wednesday afternoon when we post the link again to next Wednesday's Big Blue Kickoff Live. Hey, there's Tudo. There he is. How about my man, Tudo Azarit? Let's see. Back again. Salutes and respects. Hey, my friend, always to you too as well. And once again, he comes up as a super user. Thanks, Tuto. Man, this guy has been one of our most loyal and enthusiastic fans. Comes from the Italian rugby team across the pond. For those of you who do not know much about rugby or do not know much about the Italian sports scene, I got a feeling that Tudo is a real big player over there because he really enjoys coming on our show and touting his guys. And I appreciate a guy who's always going to tout his own guys because you got to stand up for your own guys. And he says here, of course, all diehard Giants fans across the pond, greetings from our entire Italian rugby national team in Italy. Blessings to you, my man. Tudo, we always send them right back to you because you are truly a super user or a super viewer on the Big Blue Breakdown. So glad to have you back. All right, well, guys, that's going to do it for tonight. I can only tell you, Aiden Fink says, I just called Big Blue Breakdown, Big Blue Kickoff Live twice. Yeah, it is a late night for me, Aiden. It sure is. I did Big Blue Kickoff earlier today. I did the Big Blue Breakdown tonight. We got another BBK on the Giants site coming up on Friday. And then again, next week we'll have a bunch of those. And next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, bring it right back here for the Big Blue Breakdown Live. The difference between this show and that one is we got the chance to take your video calls. Not just audio calls like on the other show. We could take your video calls here too. Don't be shy. And of course, we also have our chat room. Yeah, I pretty much talk Giants all the time. It's a labor of love, folks. I love what I do, and I'm so glad to have you aboard for the ride. I'm Paul Dottino. That will do it for tonight's show, and we hope to see you again next week on the Big Blue Breakdown Live. So long, everybody.